Hey, Brian. Good morning. Hey, man.
Good morning, Katie. If you need anything, just let me know. Could be better. You're right. How are you?
Good.
I know it's kind of
Yes.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we will start with roll call, please.
Present.
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 Yes.
Here.
Present. Yes.
Here.
Here.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Are we getting it? Can you move it? Okay, approval of minutes for September 6th.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, can we have all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Statement of chair, I would like to welcome Matt Vors. He is the new director of the state board. I know we've already talked a few times. We welcome you. We're excited to work with you, and so congratulations. I know you're not new to government. You were at the department earlier, so we welcome you back to government. And I'm not sure what to say about someone who comes back to government. But we're happy to have you, and we look forward to working with you. So congratulations. Secondly, I would like to just have a shout out for Candace Dotson. Candace is on our e-learning team, and she was just recently recognized nationally by the EdScoop as a top 25 ed tech hero. So Candace, I know you're listening in Evansville, Indiana, so congratulations. And I just want to congratulate not only Candace, but her entire team does a lot of great work for the state of Indiana. So with that, we will go down to board member comments and reports. Gordon?
I'd like to say a few things. First off, I'd like to congratulate Jerome Fleuring, who is the, hopefully I didn't butcher that name, but Crown Point Teacher of the Year. Congratulations. Second of all, I would like to just take a moment to recognize the loss of a Southport High School teacher. Her name was Megan Woodward, and she lost her life in an accident at the school. And I just wanted to take this moment to, for the board and the public to recognize her service to the state, and just lost her life in a tragic accident. And while I didn't know her personally, it seems that she was an amazing educator. So I just want to take the moment to recognize her and her service, and thoughts are with her family, her husband, and her kids.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I had one more
Oh,
thing.
I'm sorry.
And it would be remiss for us not to talk about the incident that happened in Las Vegas. There were many, not only many people who lost their lives, but there were and as a father of a kindergartner and a fourth grader, I still think about Sandy Hook from a few years ago. And while this isn't intended to be political, many problems come before this board, and some of them are urgent, and we deal with them. And we don't always do it in a way that is perfect, but we take action. We do something to try to address the problem. And I would just call as a small voice here in Indiana, as a parent of 2 school children, would call on the leadership in Washington to do something to address the fact that people can get these weapons of war, machine guns that can kill literally over 100 people or 500 people in a matter of minutes. So my small voice here at this public setting, calling for leadership. Do something. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from our board?
I just want to join with Gordon in congratulating Jerome Llewellyn from Crown Point High School as the Teacher of the Year. Great.
Anyone else? Perfect. So Jeremy will be actually joining us on our STEM Council, so we're excited to have him join us. We had a great day in Crown Point at the high school, so he'll be a great addition to what we're already working with our STEM Council, and he's very excited to do so. So thank you for acknowledging him. Okay, any other comments? We do have a few board or public comments. Brian?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of this distinguished board. Appreciate an opportunity to address you this morning. Thank you for all that you do for our children. I am Colonel Tony Daggett. I'm a Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army, over 30 years of service. I'm here to first thank you for the work that has been done, particularly on behalf of some of the private schools that are now taking advantage of HB 1384. I'm in the process of establishing a private military Christian academy in Northwest Indiana at this point. I have a petition that will be presented at some point before the board, and just wanted to make sure you had a face to go along with that petition once you do see it. I'm a family man. My wife and I, we've given birth to 10 children. We have 8 boys and 2 girls. Our oldest is a graduate of Yale. We have one graduate of Tuskegee, mechanical engineering, 2 at Valparaiso, pre-med as well as computer science. So academics has been very strong in our home, and we are committed to that. Halfway at this point through my superintendent's license, I'm a licensed principal in Indiana and Illinois. Just have completed half of my coursework. Will be starting my dissertation for the PhD program to receive my superintendent's license. Worked in the Gary School Corporation. Turned 2 of the programs around in Gary School Corporation. A program at Lew Wallace. Turned that program around along the lines of the ROTC program, as well as Westside High School. Was able to turn that program around with the ROTC program as well. What I guess I'm known most for is I was asked by the superintendent of schools there in Illinois to turn the Carver High School, preparatory high school, into a Carver Military Academy. It is now a full-blown military academy. We did that transition from 2000 to 2004. It's been extremely successful. Raised test scores, math, English, science. What we merely did was added a structured environment along with the academic strength of the school as well. And it's made a huge difference. The students wear uniforms for the 5 days. On Friday, they're in polos and khakis. At this point, my concern is simply this. I've been asked to facilitate the strengthening of schools in Afghanistan, in Iraq. I think it's time for me to work on schools right here in my home. I think we can make a difference right here. I think our young people are open to the structure that they need. Most young people want that structure, and I think that if we combine that with academic rigor, then we should be in very good shape. So I'm asking that when you do see my petition come before this board, you take it into consideration. Again, it'll be the Veterans Truth Organization Christian Military Academy. It's historic. It would be the first Christian military academy, full Christian military academy here in Indiana. So we're embarking on some great things at this point. One of the side notes, I'm so thankful for my wife, along with bringing 10 children in the world for me. She's also completed her master's degree at Moody Bible Institute. So just an amazing woman. I thank God for her. And one of the things we've done together is making sure that we are getting the word out to our veterans. We'd like to ask you to keep our veterans in your prayers. As you know, many of them are struggling with issues of PTSD, suicide ideation, and issues of military sexual assault that we are dealing with. We need to deal with these issues head on. And because these individuals who sacrifice so much, they deserve so much. So we need to be there with them each and every step of the way. Again, I'm the broadcast host right now of the Veterans Truth radio broadcast, which gets information out to veterans throughout the area. And I'm excited about the work that's being done at Gary School Corporation. So I've reached out to Dr. Hinckley, and at some point, hopefully, I'll get a chance to sit down and speak with her to support her efforts. And I think we can make a difference there. So thank you again, Board, for taking a moment and hearing me this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for your service to our country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
God bless you this morning. As always, it's great to be here in front of the State Board of Educators, some of the most dynamic educators in the country. I'm coming forward to, and I'll be speaking a little later as well, concerning the Gary Community School Corporation, representing parents. I went home. I missed the Pathways to Education because I was at home trying to talk to and to encourage the parents in that community to don't give up hope. Let's join hands with the help that they've given us and make going forward, make this a better school than it's ever been. And I know because you care about the children in the state of Indiana that my words did not fall on deaf ears. Also like to thank Colonel Daggett for coming out. I had the opportunity to work with him. He's a great gentleman, and I look forward to continually working with him. God bless you again. Thank you so much. When the Gary Community School brings forth their presentation and represent the parents, I would like to have to come back. God bless you again. You're great leaders in the state of Indiana.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. There are no best practices that I'm aware of. Brian, is that correct? Okay, so we'll go down to the consent agenda. We have latchkey, sorry, I need glasses. Latchkey request, Carmel Clay Schools Governing Body Reorg, North White School Governing Body Reorg, appointment of alternative NASB delegate, approval of summer ISTEP testing window, and approval of the formative grant fund distribution. Do we have a motion to accept?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Adjudications, I don't believe there are any. Okay, so we're on to new business. Item A, placement of schools into grade categories. We have Maggie to help us with that.
Okay, good morning. I'm just going to do a quick little presentation to provide an overview for some of the new board members about how we calculate letter grades for schools under the new system that was introduced in 2015-16, and then provide a quick summary of the audit and appeal process that was completed through the month of September, and then lastly provide some summary data for you all before the vote for placement of schools in 16-17 calculations. I did pass out this morning the PowerPoint presentation and some of the summary data that is also included into the PowerPoint. So you should have that next to you on your right or left side, somewhere around there. Okay, so quickly starting with an overview of the A through F system for the 16-17 calculations. There are two grade spans that we consider, the grade 3 through 8 span and the grade 9 through 12 span. The grade 3 through 8 span is made up of two domains, the performance domain and the growth domain, each of which are weighted equally at 50% of the overall letter grade. And then the grade 9 through 12 span includes three domains, the performance, growth, and then multiple measures domain. The multiple measures domain is worth 60% of the overall grade and consists of a graduation rate score of 30% of that and a college and career readiness achievement score that is the other 30%. Performance and growth are each weighted equally at 20% for high schools. So on the next few slides, I'm going to kind of give you a summary of each of the domains, and how it is displayed is how it was seen on the schools' report cards that they received. So to give you an idea of how the data are displayed for schools when they're looking at their accountability grade. The first domain is the performance domain. This domain consists of 2 scores that are weighted equally to give the overall domain score. It's a score for the English Language Arts subject area, and then a score for the math subject area. Each subject area is weighted equally as stated, and consists of the proficiency or pass rate on the ISTEP for that subject in grades 3 through 8 and grade 10, and then the participation rate on the ISTEP for grades 3 through 8 and 10. Just for reference, the particular screenshot here is of an elementary or middle school, so it only has data showing for the 3 through 8 side. The second domain in our system is the growth domain. This again consists of 2 subject area scores in English Language Arts and math score, which are weighted equally in the final determination. Each subject area score consists of a growth score for the top 75% of performers at the school, and then the bottom 25% performers at the school. Growth is calculated for grades 4 through 8 and grade 10. This was the first year for grade 10 that we had. Again, points are awarded for each student based on the growth to proficiency table, which was the most recent iteration was approved, I believe, at the August or September board meeting. So each student receives an individual score, and those scores are totaled up, and we take the total points earned out of the total students for that area to receive, to get the final score for the growth domain. The other thing to note too is, since this was the first year for high school, we did also have the 10 to 12 improvement score for growth. And the 10 to 12 improvement score looks at the total number of students who did not pass the graduation qualifying exam in 10th grade, but did manage to pass the graduation qualifying exam by the end of their 12th grade year. So that was kind of an additional point awarded for the 10 to 12 side. And then the last domain in our system is the multiple measures domain. This consists of 2 scores that are weighted equally. First, the College and Career Readiness Achievement Rate score, and then the Graduation Rate score. The College and Career Readiness Achievement Rate score considers all graduates, 4-year graduates, who demonstrated college and career readiness by either receiving 3 dual credit course credit hours, passing an advanced placement exam, passing in an international baccalaureate exam, or earning an industry certification. The statewide goal is 25% of graduates, 4-year graduates, earning at least one of those indicators. If the so that is what we use as kind of a multiplier for that. So we take the school's college and career readiness rate, multiply that by 25% to get the final score for the CCR goal, CCR score. The graduation rate indicator considers a 4-year graduation rate score and then a 5-year improvement score. The 4-year graduation rate is based, for the school year, was based on the state graduation rate, so it did include students who earn general diplomas as graduates in this particular calculation. If a school has a graduation rate of 90% or higher for their 4-year cohort, they receive by default 100 points. And then the 5-year simply looks at how many more students were able to graduate from the cohort in 5 years versus 4 years, and awards points for that difference. The last here is just the overall summary. So again, this is a screenshot of a elementary middle school grade 3 through 8 side. So you can see we have weights for a performance domain and a growth domain, each weighted equally. We see their final scores, which total up after we weight them at 50% each to 84.6 points, which equates to a B. We're on a 0 to 100 point scale. 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89.9 is B, etc. One note I do want to make on this as well, the placement today will also include, in addition to our traditional K-12 schools, will include our adult high schools as well, which utilize a different formula which really focuses on graduation rate and college and career readiness achievement. If you have questions, Brenda is here as well to answer any questions on that calculation. So a quick summary of the audit and appeal process. Both processes are established by either statute or state board regulation. Specifically, Indiana code requires that schools be given the opportunity to review their data before the state board officially places schools in an A through F category for the year. So the department manages that process of the audit. We had a 2-week, 10 business day submission period that ran from September 11th to September 25th. We wrapped up all of our audit reviews September 27th. And all audit changes are incorporated into the placements today. So everyone who submitted an audit has gotten their audit review completed and are incorporated in the grade placements for today. The second process is the appeal process, which is in the state board regulation, which provides schools the opportunity to appeal their accountability placement based on relevant objective factors that demonstrate that the A through F letter grade does not accurately portray the school's performance. These are forwarded to the Attorney General. Upon receipt, schools were permitted to submit at during the same window as the audits, and we've been forwarding those to the Attorney General. So a quick review of the audit determinations. Again, schools could submit between September 11th through the 25th. We completed our review September 27th, and each review consisted of 2 tiers of review to ensure accuracy in the determinations that were made. If there was disagreement between the two tiers, there was a 3rd technical review to ensure that the right determination was being made for each audit request. The slide here shows we received 45 audit requests. One thing to note is that that's the lowest we've ever received since we have done A through F. I think the most we've ever had is a little over 200. So this was a good year. So we had roughly 42% of audits were approved in some capacity, either approved in full or approved in part. We had 69% were denied either in full or in part, and then 9% were dismissed because they were questions. They weren't really a data issue. It was just a clarifying question. So we didn't continue with the process for those after checking with the school to ensure they didn't want to pursue further. One note here, out of the 45 schools that submitted audits, 4 schools saw a change in their letter grade as a result of the audit. When we consider that in the entire scope of Indiana and the landscape, that's 0.18% of schools that saw a letter grade change as a result of the audit. The biggest reasons we saw for audit submissions were the dual credit collection, schools not getting into the department records that their students had completed a dual credit course or one or more dual credit courses. Second was a school of accountability, which comes into play with our special education students to determine who is responsible or held accountable for a student who may be receiving services at a different institution or a different school corporation. Third was misreporting on the department's attendance collection. One example, we had a school who submitted all of their kindergartners as 6th graders, and so they had quite a hit on their participation rate when they looked at that. So they submitted documentation to demonstrate those students were in fact kindergartners. So we corrected that, and then lastly was inclusion and exclusion of recently arrived English learners. This is an exemption that's a federal exemption, and ensuring that schools are submitting that accurately to ensure exclusion of those students. To date, there were 40 appeal requests received, and we have forwarded 32 of those to the Attorney General. We are still compiling files for 8 of those requests. That process, as stated, will go through the Attorney General, who will do a review of all of those appeal requests. And after today's placement, there will be a second appeal window that opens until October 16th for schools to submit an appeal based on their official placement. Okay, so getting into a little bit of the data here. This first slide provides a comparison of the overall state letter grade distribution between last year and this year. We only provided the past year because 15-16 was the first official year on this new accountability system, so to have a clean comparison, we only wanted to include the 15-16 historical data. So as you can see here, it's a fairly similar distribution, but you can see that there was a little bit of a shift between B's up to A's. But overall, the total number of A's and B's is the exact same between the 2 school years. One note on what you're looking at here, this includes all schools, traditional, charter, and non-public, but it does exclude any school who submitted an appeal because they have not been officially finalized or calculated. So those schools are excluded from all data that are being presented here. So just to give you, that went fast. Just to give you another kind of pictorial display.
Can I ask a question? Would you repeat what schools are included in this?
Sure. So that includes all traditional public schools, charter public schools, and then all non-public schools that receive letter grades based on whether they're state accredited or if they're participants in the choice program.
Okay. That was my question.
And excludes anyone who submitted an appeal.
One more question. What does the Attorney General, what do they do with the appeals?
Sure. So depending on the request of the school, they will either do a desktop review of the appeal submission from the school, or they will do an in-person hearing with the school. The school has the opportunity to pursue either a desktop or an in-person review. The desktop review usually is a look over at whatever was submitted by the school and documentation, and looking at the kind of, I guess, claim that the school is making and looking at that and interpreting it against the regulation.
Just a quick question. What technical knowledge is required to identify possible errors in the data? I mean, at a school level?
At a school level?
Yes.
Not much. So to identify their error,
scientific analysis? Okay.
they can, so what we provide them is their student level information. They can see who's included, excluded. They can look at their attendance records that they submit. Really the biggest collections that we utilize are the, for accountability purposes, are the attendance collection, the course completion collection, and the limited English proficient collection, all of which are submitted by the school to us and checked over by their data folks before submitting to us. So anyone who is submitting their data should be able to look back at the collections that they have submitted to us and look over that.
Great, thank you.
So this is just, again, a kind of pictorial display of the data from the previous slide there to show you that the level of number of C's, D's, F's, and no grades have been fairly consistent between the 2 years, and we did see kind of a flip in the number of A's and B's, but overall the totals are still the same there for A's and B's. So what we have here is kind of a graph to show you the movement from last year to this year. So schools in that blue diagonal are schools who can maintained or sustained their letter grade from 15-16 to 16-17. So for example, 348 schools maintain their A, 195 schools maintain their C, and so on down that diagonal line. Anything in green demonstrates schools that moved up 1 or more letter grade from the previous school year, and anything in red demonstrates schools that decreased 1 or more letter grade. On the side there, we had 510 schools that increased 1 or more letter grades, 1,060 schools that received the same, and then 477 schools that decreased 1 or more letter grades. Yes. So there are 6 schools who went from an F to an A.
Oh, I got you.
Nope, you're fine.
In this data, the numbers are pretty close, and my question is, are the changes statistically significant?
From last year to this year for the
Correct.
overall distribution?
Correct.
No, I don't think so for the overall letter grade, but I think when we look at the domains and the breakout of each particular domain, I think that is a point of interest to look at.
Okay. So the overall, we really haven't seen any change, basically.
We did see a movement from Bs to As, but overall the same number of As and Bs total, if
Okay.
that makes sense.
But are those numbers statistically significant based on the total? So going from Bs to As or As to Bs, are those numbers significant given what the numbers are?
Yeah, I mean, we are
Or is
seeing.
it just within the margin of error?
No, we are seeing, we did see a little bit of an increase with performance. I mean, they had to earn more points to get from that B to that A. So we are seeing an increase somewhere, either if it's in the performance, the proficiency and the growth, or if it's in their high school graduation rates or college and career readiness rates. So we are seeing a bump somewhere to get from that B's to A's, but so yeah.
So can we conclude then generally based on this number that the state policy that we've implemented over the years has had a positive effect on schools, that students are achieving more?
Well, I don't know if that's a question for me to answer, really. I think I would leave that to you all as you interpret the data and look at it. And as we look at the domains in particular, so.
Sounds like you just kicked the can down the road.
Maggie, you are worth every penny. But I said you are worth every penny. You just stay put the entire meeting.
I implement.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Should I grill her more or back off?
Go ahead, because I'm enjoying this. Like, you go, Maggie.
I get an earful after the meeting from Maggie, so.
Maggie's great.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it, but it'd be nice to have a public statement, maybe from DOE, saying that we continue to show growth, or it's stabilized, or some kind of a conclusion. So that's what I'm looking for. Maybe you're not the person, but maybe someone from DOE could speak to that. I think it's important. I think the public wants to know, are students continuing to improve? And in past years, we've been able to say publicly that the public policy that we've set forth has increased student achievement, and we've celebrated that. And so I'm ready to celebrate, but yet the numbers, I'm not sure, are significant enough. And so you're saying, go ahead, celebrate, and then someone else will tell me whether I should be celebrating?
I think celebration is a personal choice, so.
Wow.
She's on point today.
Sounds like you're running for state superintendent.
No. Hey, have at it. Come on up.
Okay, moving on. So this provides a breakdown of letter grades by school type. So that first blue column is your traditional public schools. The yellow are your charters. And then your far right blue are the non-publics. As you can see, so traditional schools, I kind of tend to group your A's and B's together. So traditional schools are at about 62% A's and B's. Charters are at about 33% A's and B's. And non-publics are at about 70.5% A's and B's. On your traditional side, grouping D's and F's, I do that mostly because at the federal level, those are kind of our school improvement identification. For traditionals, about 15% D's and F's. For charters, 34% D's and F's, and non-publics, 11% D's and F's. Yes, so NA means we were unable to calculate a grade for the school. So if they are an NA, that means they did not have enough data to calculate any of the domains for the school. That tends to happen with our smaller schools which tend to also be our non-publics, which is why you see we have 17 or 5% of those non-public schools not being able to have a grade. The next slide provides a breakout of letter grade distribution by the school's configuration. So far left there are your group schools that are English and, elementary and middle schools, so grades 3 through 8. Traditionally, high schools, grade 9 through 12 only. Combined, we do have schools that have a combination of grades on both the 3 through 8 and the 9 through 12 side. For example, a school that has grades 7 through 12. That's a middle school, high school. So that is what that column represents. And then last are our feeder schools, which are K-2 schools that don't have any of their own data. They are based on the data from the receiving schools, or the schools where those students feed into for third grade. So you should see some very close numbers between the elementary, middle, combined, and feeder schools. But we do see a little bit of a different distribution for high schools. 85% of high schools received A's or B's in 16-17, which is up from the prior year. The next slide just provides some numbers on students served by school letter grade. Since we did see more A's this year, we did see more students served in A's and B's schools from the previous school year. I think about 90,000 more students are served in A schools in 16-17 than 15-16. But we also did see about a little over 6,000 more students that were served in D and F schools in 2017.
Maggie, if you had an opportunity to look at letter grades vis-a-vis school size or school corporation size, is there an alignment or some kind of connection between those?
You know, we haven't done that for this school year yet, just because we were working on this, but that surely is something that we have looked at in the past. You know, a lot of numbers have been in my head lately, so I can't really remember what exactly it looked like in the past, but we can pull that together for you.
I like that response, yet, because I think it's really important from a public policy perspective to look at if there's a distribution in certain kinds of communities, rural, city, town, whatever it may be, and data never hurts. And so to look at the data is one thing, and then to make policy decisions is another step. But we need to sort of get more data on that. And so I would appreciate it having it distributed by types of populations. And so I guess I'm looking at just break it down on a strata of large cities, medium cities, and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Maggie, and thank you for that question. Can we all get that information?
That's what I was assuming.
Yep.
All
Yeah.
guys.
Urban, so we're doing urban, small town, rural, and what am I missing?
Urban, rural, suburban.
Suburban. I was
We have a
missing
few
suburban.
other categories I think that we've used. in the
Usually
past.
there's 4 that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, I will be back here in November, so I can bring that with
Awesome,
me in
thank you.
November.
Maggie, I think too, we could do a deeper dive now that we have regional DWD data, that we could probably do some comparison with some poverty and employment and different items that are probably important in this conversation. So we can do that. Yep.
thanks.
We'll pull all kinds of stuff for you.
Great.
This reflects all students K to 12?
Yes, all K-12. And then just to remind you of the caveat, this does exclude students in schools that appealed. So keeping that in mind.
How many students are in that cohort of appeals?
I don't know.
Okay. How many,
We had 40 schools
there were 40
appeal.
schools, we just don't know the numbers.
Yeah,
That's
and
okay. That's
those
all right.
schools are all across the board. We have
That's
some
okay.
small non-publics, and we have some from big urban districts.
It's
So
not going to make much
no,
distribution.
we'll see some, but I mean, your actual like percentage
It's
distributions,
not
those
gonna
aren't going to
a
change
whole
that
lot.
much.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so now I wanted to provide you guys just a breakdown of the domain scores specifically. So everything up until this slide has been on the overall letter grade for the schools. From here to forward will be about the specific domain performance. So this is the breakdown of the performance domain for grades 3 through 8. So you can see fairly similar performance between the 2 school years on this. One note too is that just as a reminder of the 3 through 8 school configurations, 28.4% received an A. So comparing that here with the 2.2% of schools that received an A on the performance domain. The reason why we see that kind of disparity comes into play with when we look at the growth domain for schools where 4 through 8. Where we have 74.5% of schools receiving an A. That kind of is what helped close that gap between the 2.2% A in performance and then the 74.5% in growth. Bring that together, you're going to end up with about the 22 to 25% receiving an A overall. The average gross score for grades 4 through 8 was 98.8 points out of 100. The lowest points earned on growth was 50.3 points out of 100, and the highest points earned for 4 through 8 was 148.6 points out of 100.
Maggie, can you go back one slide?
Mm-hmm.
Those are fairly serious numbers on the performance part, and I don't want to just continue without making note of the percentage of schools that are at C, D, and F. That's a very, very, very high percentage. Just looking at it, it's 80-something percent. And I think as a board, we need to, maybe at another meeting, to really look at that. Because performance domain, as I understand it, is students are reaching minimum competency in particular academic areas. And I'm concerned with the growth data on the next slide that we're masking a real problem in Indiana with the performance achievement of students. And I think it's really important that we look at that. We're only 14% of schools are in the A and B category. I mean, that is very, very serious. And when we looked at combined data, aggregate data with growth, everything looks fine. But there's two components. One is performance and the other is growth. And on this board, we had a lot of debate about whether it should be 50-50, 60-40, so forth and so on, and we agreed on 50-50. But what's happening is we're masking that performance domain data. So what I'm asking for, Madam Superintendent, is that we bring this back onto the agenda, maybe during a discussion, and really do a deep dive. Why is it happening? What are the factors that are causing this?
So, and I think that kind of plays into Maggie's hesitation when you ask, is this a time to celebrate? I will say I've been across the state several times for regional meetings, and the conversation I'm having with schools and communities is very honest and very candid about next year's accountability system is going to look different. That growth, we've been very open about that. That growth was a big help this year. Now, we love to see high grades, and we celebrate that piece. But it's hard to compare apples to apples because when you're saying, you know, should we start celebrating, we don't have any good trend data to celebrate with because we keep moving the targets. So, right. And we're moving it again. Right. And I know we'll be under rulemaking, and so all that may change again. So that's the hesitancy, I think, for all of us to say, should we be celebrating, should we not? Absolutely, I know people are going to go out and celebrate high grades because that's what we do as a school. But I've been very open about caution, because we can't figure out, again, with 1003, how to even get growth in the high school model. You take growth out of this high school model, you can see how we're performing. So that's where our caution is on all the decisions that we're making, and I'm being very transparent with the field to say, start educating your school boards yesterday so that they are prepared for if you see dips in your letter grades because you got graduation rate hanging out, you have rulemaking hanging out there, and you also have the growth issue hanging out there. So we share your comments and concerns, Dr. Freitas. I appreciate your comments, but we've had a lot of conversation. I think rulemaking for this board will be big as we proceed on.
Right. Are schools getting both grades, or are they getting the performance grade and the growth grade? Or are they only getting the aggregate grade of both?
Right, so when you pull up the report card, they have the overall summary, which shows how those two domains or three domains play into the overall calculation. And then as they scroll down, you see the score for performance specifically, you see the score for growth specifically, and then you see the growth for the multiple measures domain specifically. So each score is broken out independent of the overall score.
So when you say score, the letter grade, that's the designation?
So they have the overall letter grade, and then they have the point values, which, you know, is on the 0 to 100 point scale.
As we look at rules and to be transparent, I think the public looks at the grade. Typically, they're not going to dig down into scores and understand sort of the weeds of all this. So I think we need to look at issuing two letter grades, one for proficiency, one for growth. And I'm just throwing that out. Once we get to the rulemaking process, that will start to identify low areas and high areas. And so this kind of data, I think, a lot of communities in Indiana, I think, would be shocked that their school might be a C, D, or F, and they do well in growth, and the average is a C. Well, we're really masking the data. So I'm going to urge us to go with two separate grades so the public knows exactly how their students are doing on performance and in growth.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
As to David's point about a lot of parents not doing a deep dive into the numbers, I think that's absolutely correct. I think it's incumbent upon us to be very careful about the language we use to describe it. And I just felt a little discomfort personally as we continually talk about performance and growth being equally weighted. That's really not true. We have a bias toward growth. I mean, if that's what we're going to do, let's say that's what we're doing. To show the scale that shows 50%, doesn't really get to the fact that we allot substantially more weighted points for growth than we do for performance. So I think we should be more careful in the language we use to talk about that so we don't sort of confuse / parents about what's going on. But as it relates to this chart, do we have the numbers for performance domain for all of the testing grades?
So we break it up by 3 through 8 and then 10, and we have 10 coming up.
So do you know, like offhand, like 3 to 10, well, what percent of students were AB?
You mean students or schools?
Are these students or?
These are all schools. So the school gets an overall score.
Okay, so the school. So what percent of the schools?
Yeah. So
performance
2.2%
domain,
of 2.2% of your 3 through 8, and then we're going to see here in a minute that it's 0.2% of grade 10 are A's. So that's 2.4%.
My math's not that good. So altogether, what percentage of the schools across the board were A and B?
So let's say 2.4%, and then 12.7%. So 15.1% A's and B's on the performance domain.
So that's striking. So what we just showed was a slide where we're saying 70% of the kids go to A and B schools, but in terms of proficiency, performance, actually only 15% of those kids end up with performance scores that we feel are proficient. Striking. Thank you.
The next is just a graph here to show you the distribution of the performance domain, which is that blue line, and then the growth domain letter grade distribution and the percentages of schools receiving A's, B's, C's, D's, F's for those. So that gives you kind of an idea of the kind of distribution for each of the domains for 3 through 8. This next, now we're going to look at the grade 10 domain scores. So this slide here shows you the comparison of the performance domain for grade 10 between 15, 16, 16, 17. Again, this is grade 10, and this is both years were on the 10th grade ISTEP assessment. So you can see kind of the distribution there. Fairly similar between the 2 school years. We did see a few schools move up from the F span to the D span, but otherwise fairly similar between the 2 school years.
Maggie, I just want to be sure I'm understanding that previous slide.
This one here?
No, the next one. Does this slide say that 78.3% of our schools in grade 10 are F schools when you look at performance?
So this says that 78.3% of grade 10 ISTEP scores were at the F range because they fell between the 0 point to 59.9 points on the 0 to 100 point scale.
So the issue is not only for grades 3 through 8, we were just talking about, it's also for grade 10.
Yes. And, you know, when we consider that the current state average proficiency rates on ISTEP are, what were they this year? For 3 through 8, we're in like 50, were they 58 overall? Something like that. And then for high school, it was in the 30% range. So, you know, this kind of translates into that when we consider the ISTEP proficiency rates, because that's what this measures is ISTEP proficiency.
So 95% of schools, grade 10, received a D or an F. I guess I'm not celebrating anymore.
I think that makes the case for expanding the pre-K program, David.
I agree with you, but
So the next slide here is the grade 10 growth domain. As stated earlier, this is the first year for the grade 10 growth domain, so we don't have any comparison data for this from the previous school year. So this provides the distribution of A through F grades earned by schools for the grade 10 growth. As you can see, it's kind of an inverse of what we have for the performance domain. 263 of our schools with grade 10 had an A, or 70.4%. The multiple measures domain for, that should be grade 12. So this looks again at your graduation rate score and then your college and career readiness achievement rate score to feed the overall multiple measures domain score. Again, the grad rate will look at your state rate, which does include the general diplomas as graduates, and the college and career readiness achievement rate looks at the four-year graduates that earn a college and career readiness indicator with a goal of 25% of graduates earning the one or more of those indicators. So as you can see here again, fairly similar distribution between the two school years, between 15-16 and 16-17 for this indicator as well. And again, similarly for grades 3 through 8, we did a distribution line graph here for each of the high school domains scores to just kind of provide a comparison of the distributions for each independent domain for grades 9 through 12. Lastly, just wanted to provide some school improvement summary information for you. For the 17-18 school year, from the federal perspective, we will continue to utilize the focus and priority program that was under the waiver for interventions and maintain the current list that we have had for focus and priority schools and exit any schools that met exit criteria. So this provides just kind of some trend data over the past 4 years. So again, this does not include those schools that submitted appeals. So we had 1780 schools, 280 schools are either identified as focus or priority, 55 schools exited improvement status, and then we saw 108 schools that have been in improvement status demonstrate improvement by either going up one or more letter grade. Just for reference, schools in improvement status, those are defined as either focus schools or priority schools. And focus schools are those schools who received a D, and priority schools are those schools who received an F. And then lastly, just at the state level, we do have a state timeline based on consecutive F letter grades. So this gives a breakdown of the number of state schools, state public schools that with consecutive F letter grades. So this year we had 36 schools with their first F letter grade. For 16-17, 31 is with 2. And those two, I believe those two, year 1 and year 2 will be on that new timeline, the expedited timeline of 4 years rather than 6 years for the State Board intervention timeline. Any questions?
Questions for Maggie? Maggie, thank you. I know you and your team worked really hard on this information, so thank you for having that today. Appreciate it. Oh, now we have to approve these grades, I guess. I'm just like, okay, bye. Yeah. So do we have a motion to accept the placement of the school letter grades?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes. Approval of IPS turnaround academies.
Good morning.
Morning.
I think I'm the lead for this presentation. It's an opportunity that I enjoy each time I get the pleasure of coming before the State Board of Education to share the work of Indianapolis Public Schools. As you may know, the district has recently approved a plan to dramatically transform our high school experience. And I share that with you specifically because I believe some have viewed the plan as a facilities plan. I remind you today that this plan is actually an academic. Better prepare our students, particularly at the high school level, for the next phase of post-secondary success. And so this morning I'll provide an overview of what that plan entails as it relates to the launch of our college and career theme academies, and give you more specifics on the offerings of our high schools and our new model. Then provide you some details on what the next steps have been as it relates to how we get students enrolled in those options, and then briefly provide an overview of the engagement process with our community as our Board of Commissioners have considered and approved this proposal. This proposal was really founded in our mission 3E, which is to ensure that every student who walks across the stage has a handshake promise that they're prepared to be employed at a livable wage, enlisted in the armed forces, or enrolled in a post-secondary institution. And we believe we needed to dramatically shift the way we served our students in high school to ensure that we deliver on that. Stronger engagement and ensuring that we're creating pipelines into high-demand, high-wage opportunities. A part of this, in terms of our 3E effort, was also ensuring that we had a better understanding of the labor market. And so we partnered with Ascend Indiana and a couple other workforce development organizations to ensure that our college and career themed academies were really preparing students for job opportunities here in central Indiana and also Indianapolis. What we also build on is our understanding of what students are doing in high school and where they're performing well. And what we notice is when students are taking work-based curriculum or taking courses in our career and technical education offerings, they're much more successful in their high school experience in terms of student achievement and also graduation rates as well. And we see the same data trends across the nation as well when students are participating in these courses. What we also learn is that students who are attending high school by our choice offerings are much more successful compared to those students that are in our traditional setting and their assignment is based on where they live. And so our recommendation to our Board of Commissioners is that students no longer are driven in their high school experience by where they live, but actually what they want to become. And our students have options to choose from across the board in our high schools. And so beginning the 2018-19 school year, all of our high schools will be schools of choice. And we'll provide transportation for students based on those offerings that they have selected from. We reminded our families that students still have an opportunity to earn dual credit. We still are pushing for more advanced course offerings. We want to ensure that students, again, are prepared for college and career, and this is an opportunity to do that. But they also have the ability to take elective courses and earn credentials and certification in high school should they want to go to work right out of high school. What we're seeing is more and more students are interested in entry-level positions where they have stackable credentials and they can go to work and their employer will pay for their college tuition. And for many of our students, that is the new college with no debt. We also are learning that in terms of college graduates, many college graduates, actually more so now than ever, are going back home and living with their parents and guardians. And so part of this effort is to ensure, even as an IPS parent, to me, college and career readiness means my son is graduating from IPS and he does not return back home. And he is self-sufficient. And so part of this effort, again, is ensuring that we start that process as early as possible. And this begins with career exploration with our 8th graders, and then they get an opportunity to select their high school option going into 9th grade. As a part of this effort, we have reduced our footprint of high schools. Years ago, we had 8 high schools. We currently have 7 high schools. Our board recently approved the consolidation of our high schools down to 4. And so in the next couple slides, I will share with you the high school offerings for the 2018-19 school year, which includes some of our current programming that we offer to students as relates to choice, and then new offerings as relates to our college and career themed academy. The first high school to be featured is Arsenal Technical High School, which is our largest high school, which includes a number of options that are currently in play, whether it's our Career Technical Center or our New Tech Academy or our Math and Science Academy in Law and Public Policy. But we're also adding a college and career theme academy to support students that are interested in the field of construction, engineering, and design. We are also, it's important to note, as students are exploring careers, we're helping them make decisions about careers that they're interested in, not just based solely on the career, but what their gifts are, what their talents are, what they're interested in doing. The next is Crispus Attucks High School. Crispus Attucks currently has had a focus on medical careers. We are widening the scope of that focus to ensure that we cover more careers. And so we are expanding that to a health science academy. And with all of the college and career theme academies, you can see some of the potential careers that we've identified here in Indianapolis and Central Indiana that students can go into. And then we're also adding a teaching, leading, and learning academy. One, we want to grow our own educators, but we also want to give students opportunity to explore other fields in early childhood development, counseling, and also education. George Washington High School will actually have 3 college and career theme academies, which will be the most in terms of our academies. They will offer the Information Technology Academy, Advanced Manufacturing, Engineering, and Logistics, and Business and Finance. Again, these academies are aligned to the labor needs here and also the interests of our students. As previously shared on the other high schools, we've also aligned this presentation to potential careers that students may want to pursue. And then finally, we have Shortridge High School, which is our IB high school. We'll continue with our IB curriculum there, but we're also adding a career-related option for students interested in that option. And then we will continue the operation of our Visual and Performing Arts Academy for those students that are interested in the arts. And all of that will take place at Shortridge High School. We believe there's a natural connection between the Visual and Performing Arts and the IB program. In each of the slides, we've also included some of our feeder programs. So in this particular slide, we're highlighting our CFI programs, which is our IB options for students in grades K through 8, and then Edison School for the Arts, which is our performing arts school for K-8, and then our Butler Lab Reggio partnership.
Dr. Farabee, can I ask a question? Mm-hmm. Looking at this, I commend you for your plan. I'm curious on how you'll staff it, because these are the high-wage, high-demand areas. These are many of the pathways that we're all under review right now, and the message we get from the entire state and the entire country is there are no teachers. So I'm just kind of curious, what is your plan for 18-19 is aggressive, and I'm just curious.
And so for our core teachers, all have been displaced because we are consolidating our high schools, and so there have to be movement among our core teachers at the high school level. For those teachers that have special certification and teach career and technical education courses, they will remain with the current options that they teach. We also have the ability to partner with several organizations here and businesses in Indianapolis that offer their support and resources. So for example, Salesforce will be supporting our Information Technology Academy. But we also have been able to identify field experts that can go into our classroom and teach courses in those particular areas where students are earning certifications or completing their career and technical education courses. And so we haven't seen as much concern as relates to filling those positions. Our challenge has been in the core areas, particularly around math and sciences, where we have been challenged with secondary teachers. And so we have a very robust teacher leadership model and opportunity for teachers to earn additional compensation to attract and retain qualified educators, particularly in areas of math and science at the high school.
Thank you. I was just curious. Yes, Mr. Walker.
I love your pathway. But to address the question raised by the superintendent, do you feel that we have created, or the state currently has, sufficient licensing pathways to address that issue?
I think, for us, that hasn't been a challenge because many of our career and technical education staff members are either classified employees, so a licensure is not required, and I believe the licensure has been flexible enough for those individuals that need certification to teach those courses. I would encourage you to think about, as much as possible, students have the ability to earn dual credit, and having staff in our schools that can easily earn those credentials, or our post-secondary institutions have the ability to come on our campus and offer those courses. As much you can do to allow that to occur would be greatly appreciated. But in terms of the certification process, that hasn't been a challenge for us.
I just have to ask then, I don't want to put you on the spot because I don't know if you have this data. When I look at, we break down highly effective, effective, and IPS stands out to me because there's so many teachers not evaluated. And I assumed it was because either they were not there long enough or they weren't certified in that area or whatever the case may be. So you're telling me staffing is not a problem for IPS. I'm just trying to connect the dots for
Let me be clear. In terms of career technical education, I think that's what you were asking.
Yeah, so in this area you're fine, and some of the other areas you're not, is what I'm hearing.
More of our challenges are in our core areas. For example, I highlighted math and science at the secondary level. We also have challenges with foreign language. So, for example, part of our IB offering is to provide students the ability to take Mandarin, Chinese.
Right.
We don't always have those teachers at our fingertips. So I don't want to create a picture that's really rosy, too rosy, I should say, in terms of our challenges on staffing. Obviously, there is. Specifically with career technical education, we've been able to hire some of the best professionals in the field, whether it's in our welding program or whether it's our students earning their credentials to be a pharmacy technician or a certified nursing assistant. We've been able to hire those people in those fields to fill those positions. But again, when in terms of our core positions is where we struggle some.
Okay, I appreciate that. Dr. Bertram?
Thank you. Dr. Fairby, thank you again for your leadership. And just in full disclosure, my organization is mentioned in your plan a few times, so I just want to put that out in public before I ask my questions. I think it's a good choice.
We agree.
But no, but I'm really curious though, and I have long been an advocate of these kind of pathways. I think it's the right type of approach and really focuses students. There are 2 or 3 areas though that I have deep concern about, and not with your plan, but in general, as students start thinking about careers, the future of work, what it looks like for them, and economic prosperity that we're hoping to engage our students with beyond their formal educational experience. And one is, we talk about math and science specifically. I mean, years of research suggests that students make decisions whether they're good in math and science as early as 2nd grade. I'm curious of how many pathways are actually shut off to students when they're making decisions at grade 8 and 9 because they don't think they're good at math and science. And I'm thinking, what can we do earlier to ensure that students have the skills necessary to actually take advantage of many of the careers available to them in these pathways? And that's one. The other really centers on the whole idea of career exploration. And the earlier that we can expose students to a wide range of industries and careers, the better off they're going to be. And so many children are just limited in their view, as well as many of the people who are counseling them around careers. There's just a very narrow view. We don't really see the expansive nature of this or how it's changing, which brings me to my 3rd point around the growth mindset. And how do students understand the transportable skills they're going to need to be effective in this economy? Because many of the jobs, and I spend a lot of time visiting corporations and employers across the country, around the world. One of the things that's just very clear, anything we can automate, we're going to automate. Anything that we can eliminate human capital, we're going to do it. And in fact, I was just an employer recently, and basically what they've done is create a bifurcated system. They've eliminated all the middle wage jobs, and they have entry-level jobs that are almost mindless jobs, and then they have high-skilled jobs. And those things that are what I would consider a livable wage that you mentioned earlier are eroding. And we're seeing that in more and more industries. You go into General Motors manufacturing facilities and you see a lot of robots, a lot of welding robots and painting robots and many things that not too many years ago were done by humans. So I'm concerned about our children who are leaving high school and going directly to the workforce and what the long-term implications are for them. So for them to just to go into a job today that may pay them a desirable wage, those jobs are going to go away. And what happens when they're 30 years old, 35 years old, without any kind of credential, and they've gone into the workplace? So I'm thinking if the more that we can share with our children that while this may be a first step for them, that growth mindset is so important, and that they continue to learn and hopefully develop and earn credentials over time that will give them more flexibility across these pathways as adults. So I share those because I think it's really important around the whole idea of career exploration and what the true implications for students several years out.
Yeah, a couple reactions. We share your concerns in terms of automation, and there's 2 points we recently shared with our students. One is, as we're recruiting more educators, we remind our students that there's one field that has not been designated as an area where automation could significantly occur. You know what that is? Teaching and learning. So we're encouraging more of our students to consider the field of education, because as we look down the long path of automation, it just doesn't seem to be a robust opportunity there to automate the education process. What we also see is majority of the states in the U.S. rely on transportation as a major industry. As we think about automation and how the transportation market would dramatically change, it would dramatically shift the labor force, as you've highlighted. And so what we're trying to get students to understand is how the job market is shifting, but also what are the specific skills that they can earn either in high school or post-secondary that will transcend the automation that's in place. But we also know that for many of our students, the jobs that will exist in the future are not even here today. And so what we try to do in terms of that exploration process is ensure that our industries are engaged with helping our young people understand that. And so most recently, here in September in Indianapolis, we invited over 8,000 eighth graders to the fairgrounds. Superintendent McCormick was gracious enough to join us. And it was just a day of 4,000 volunteers sharing all the different career options here in Indianapolis and central Indiana. And those are the types of experience that we want to build upon. And that was JobSpark, and that was a partnership through Junior Achievement, a couple businesses here. And we want to build on that. And in terms of Project Lead the Way, we believe that that is our elementary and middle grade solution in terms of math and science. And we've dramatically expanded that offering to more of our elementary and middle schools.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it is, not with PLW, but in general, I think that whole idea around, you talk about careers, the thing that I'm always concerned about is what employers' self-interest is today may not be in the best interest of our children long term. I think we need to keep that in mind, because that's where a lot of things can change very quickly. So.
I want to hear your opinion on, I know with Grad Pathways, several of the conversations regarding the career tech pathways are really aligned. And so I think in Indiana, the conversation obviously is going more toward high wage, high demand, and incentivizing that much higher than some of the other courses. Knowing that is fluid, how concerned are you that you get these established? I know it's not all about the money, but as a superintendent, you pay attention to your financial resources. So are you concerned that that is revisited every year in Indiana and it's so fluid? Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I mean, not having consistency in anything is obviously troubling. Just listen to the conversation about proficiency versus growth and where we are in our accountability system. I don't think you can have that conversation without, discussing openly and transparently, how rapid that system of accountability is changing. It's been very volatile over the last couple of years. I anticipate it'll be very fluid as we have more conversation about graduation pathways as well. So, we just need to understand that any changes impacts our educators and our students greatly, and be mindful of that. Anything that we can do to ensure that it is more seamless for students to graduate and have the ability to experience post-secondary success, we need to pursue that. And we also need to have a better understanding also of what our post-secondary institutions are looking for. Because when I talk with our post-secondary institutions, they're not talking to me about how students are performing on ISTEP. They're looking at other skill sets. And I think those are conversations I encourage you to have as you think about how we measure college and career readiness. Because our ability, and I go back to what I mentioned earlier about the handshake promise on graduation day, our ability to ensure that our students are ready. Again, I go back to the example of my son, is paramount. Because again, more so than ever, students are challenged when they go off to post-secondary institution. Even when they graduate, the ability to find work for a livable wage. And when students can't do that, obviously that compromises their quality of life, but our quality of life as a whole. So I encourage you to think about that as you make decisions as it relates to graduation pathways and accountability. What really matters, and what do we really want for the students here in the state of Indiana?
Thank you. Dr. Freitas.
Dr. Farabee, I think it's a wonderful proposal, and congratulations to you and your school board. It's incorporating best practices, incorporating research, and I certainly support what you're doing. Two questions. One is, once a student decides on a particular high school, are they able to transfer to another school if they change their mind? It seems like a lot of high school students seem to change their mind within those 4 years. And the second question is, regardless of the high school that they go to, are there a set of core competencies that students complete? For example, critical thinking, problem solving, and also the soft skills, being resilient, showing up on time, and so forth and so on. So are there a set of core competencies that cut across all the high schools?
Yes, there will be core competencies across all high schools, whether it's their physical education requirements or it's citizenship, character education. There will be standards across all high schools that will be offered and required of students. In terms of flexibility, with students making moves, we're aware that students may change their minds and there may be some movement. However, we are considering limiting movement when students are in their junior and senior year, or they progress far along into a pathway. Making a shift late in the game could compromise the student's ability to graduate on time. So we don't want to create a revolving door. Obviously, we don't want to stack up the best basketball or football team with transfers or have a revolving door where students are moving first semester and second semester. So we want to be smart about how students may transition it out, but we would allow that to occur. What we're excited about, though, what we believe this opportunity will eliminate, is the challenge that we've had with student mobility. And so because you're choosing your high school experience and it's not based on where you live, if students at IPS move, which we know they do often, you can continue to go to the high school that you selected based on your choice, which we think is really exciting. So we're going to study the effect of eliminating mobility in our high school through this option and see what it does for our performance.
Okay. Kind of got you
Good to go?
sidetracked.
Okay.
Keep going.
So,
thank you.
In the next slide, we just highlight how students have started the process of enrolling into these options. So we started first with our students that are currently in our choice programs. Many of these students have already selected the option that they're interested in and either continue in their current offering or choose with one of our college and career themed academy. We are partnered with several public traditional and charter schools across Indianapolis in the Enroll Indy system, which is a common enrollment system that will begin in November. The students have the ability to select from our college and career theme academies and other offerings inside of IPS and also with partner organizations. And then families will receive their notification of their match in February. As a part of the transition process, we have established a district transition team. One of the reasons we had our Board of Commissioners make this decision in September is we wanted a long runway for the 2018-19 school year, and so the majority of this school year will be working to ensure that we have a successful start for August of 2018. A lot of that is around relationships, whether that be student-to-student relationships, adult-to-adult relationships, or adult-to-students relationship. There'll be transition teams, we call them satellite teams, at each of our high schools, and many of those teams will include student advisory, parent advisories that will inform and guide the process. And then for those schools that were closed, as we've consolidated our high schools, we'll continue to work with the community to preserve the legacy of those high schools and ensure that those institutions are honored in a special way. Specifically with the recommendation before you as it relates to John Marshall Middle School and Arlington High School, it's important to note our recommendation to Commissioner that was approved was to discontinue any middle school or high school offerings at John Marshall and offer that facility for either sale or lease. And so part of the transition process is ensuring that all of those current 8th graders there choose from one of the 4 high school options, and then the current 7th graders will transition to a middle school at Arlington Middle School. At Arlington High School, we will no longer operate that facility as a high school, and then those students that are currently there would choose among our 4 high school options. And as you recall from the previous slide, we've already started that process with students being informed of those options and they have the ability to select the college and career theme academy that is to interest of them.
Dr. Farabee, what happens? You go to enrollment time and you have the mass majority of kids that love health science and they all want to go to Crispus Attucks. I mean, what's the plan for that? So that I know you're trying to provide choice, and I truly appreciate that, but I also get kids a little bit. So what happens if you don't have a nice, somewhat even distribution? And I know that's not going to happen that way, but what if it's very out of whack?
Well, the beauty of our facility challenge and opportunity is we have space.
Okay.
And so we were at a utilization of about 30 to 35% in most of our high school. This plan puts us at about 70, 75%. So we have room to grow at all of our facilities should we have overwhelming interest. We also are not afraid to replicate an option that's really attractive to families and offer it at a second site. And so again, our students will drive the programming in our district. But we do know it's going to take some time to educate families on construction and engineering. And so we know out the gate, not many students may be interested, so it'll take some time to build a program. But over time, if students aren't interested, we may discontinue one of the offerings, grow one of the offerings that has been attractive for families.
Yes.
Hello. Is there, like, if one of your schools reaches capacity, is there a lottery program, or like, how will that work? Let's say if you have a student, a high school built for 1,500 students, 1,700 students want to go there. How will those students be chosen?
It is a lottery. And so, for example, some students, we give them their preference. So, for example, what we heard in our community engagement process was if a student is a junior, and they're going into their senior year, we need to be respectful of that last year and the high school experience. So if a junior is in their high school and their high school is going to be open for 18-19, we said to those juniors, you can stay in that high school. If students are in a current program that's not being impacted by this process, they can stay in that program. So those preferences exist, and then if there are interests a particular program that exceeds the capacity, then we are honoring students, first or second choice to ensure that if students don't get their first choice, at least they get their second choice. So we're collecting those numbers now. We'll see how the numbers play out.
It may not be an issue.
Yeah, it may not be an issue. We anticipate, many of the students, based on what we've seen now, will stay with where they are in terms of where they've been in choice programs. So right now, half of our high school students were already in a choice program. We anticipate most of them will stay where they are. What we don't know is where the other half will go and what they're interested in. As we gather that information, we'll make plans accordingly.
And I do appreciate the choice options, I think. As going through this grad panel, I think the things that we see is when things become relevant to students, performance goes up.
Absolutely.
And offering choice, you somewhat create relevance for them. With right comes responsibility. So when you have the right to choose your school, now you have a responsibility to do your end of the part. And I think that this will be successful. I'm excited.
Thank you.
Dr. Farabee, have you and your board made a decision as to what you intend to do with manual and how?
Yeah, a part of this proposal included the approval of a resolution that stated that we do not intend to operate manual and how as high schools should those facilities be returned to IPS. Should that plan change, we will definitely inform the State Board of Education. We just don't believe that that's the most effective way to serve students academically. One, for example, how that's a middle school, high school combination campus. We have moved away from that model. What we found is having the same staff serve middle grades and high school students has proven not to be a successful strategy for us. CUSA may be able to have some success with it. And then having really small high schools has not been a successful strategy for us as well. For example, if you have a high school of 400 students, that's approximately 100 students per grade level. What you can offer in that high school is very limited, especially if you have a significant number of students that are below grade level that require intervention and remediation. If you have a high school of 1,200 students and you have approximately 300 students per grade level, you can dramatically improve what you can offer. And if students need additional support, you're better able to support them.
Do you plan to undergo the same process you did with Arlington and Marshall for the closure of those two schools?
We would work with the State Board of Education and CUSA on a successful transition plan. I think as we get closer to when their contract expires, we would love the opportunity to come back together as a team and propose a solution. But as it relates today, we just don't believe the current configuration for high schools on those campuses would be the best model for us. In addition, we have space among our current high schools in the district. So,
does it impact your new model for those schools to continue in existence for the next 2 years?
No, it does not impact our current model for those students to currently in CUSA schools to continue in the pathway as it's designed, no.
But if we attempted at some point at the end of that process to give those schools back to you, you're saying IPS would close them and no longer operate them as...
Yeah, the thinking today is we would no longer operate those buildings as high schools, but we would love the ability to collaborate with CUSA on a successful transition, which I think could include a number of different options. But
like what?
For example, we have seen, like I said earlier, when we separate middle school and high school students, there's more success for both groups. And so we know that there are a number of middle grade students that are currently being served. Potentially, one of those campuses could be used as a middle school site. Financially, I don't believe we need both facilities to date. If you look at the capacity of those facilities and the number of students, the last report I received, there was approximately, between the two campuses, maybe 1,500 students. And if you look at the capacity of those buildings, if you put 1,500 students in one of those facilities, it would be underutilized. So financially, it doesn't make sense. And so we want to be really smart good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. And so we would want to think through perhaps maybe not even having one of those buildings where it's being operated. District may operate one of them. So again, that's just a flavor of the potential that we might have. But we would want to make those decisions in collaboration with CUSA and our Board of Commissioners.
And it was probably an unfair line of questions, but I had you here, and it's very helpful to at least me in terms of thinking about how we sort of unwind and get out of that process. So I appreciate you responding to that off the cuff.
Yeah. Transparently, we didn't insert ourselves in the conversation because I think the State Board of Education should make decisions as it relates to the turnaround academies on the merit of the academic performance. Similar to what we described for our academic plan for our high schools. It shouldn't be grounded in facilities, and we know that's the consideration. And so if there's opportunity to discuss the future of those high schools going forward, we'd love to be a part of that conversation.
You said that after this plan is fully implemented, you'll be at 72-73% capacity at your high schools, correct?
Correct.
Overall, then, what is
Well, that's what we're projecting. Again, we don't know what all the students will choose. So
Sure.
on average, we anticipate.
On average, that's your capacity
Correct.
expectation. After your full plan is implemented, what is the net unused facilities you will have in the district?
We have 2 facilities that are currently operating as a high school and middle schools that we intend to lease or sell. And that is John Marshall and Broad Ripple. So that will reduce our footprint. There are a number of central service facilities that we intend to either lease or sell, and we will move central service staff out of those facilities into some of our high school space to increase the capacity and utilization there. And so we anticipate overall this will improve the district's efficiency as it relates to facilities. And one of the benefits is you get the one-time sale revenue, but we also reduce our expenses for utilities and operations associated with the facility.
So your plan is to divest any unused facility?
Exactly. Unless this body is able to provide additional revenue to Indianapolis Public Schools.
Well played, Dr. Farabee.
You should sell. You should sell.
Sure, from the sale of our building.
How does the charter school law work with respect to unused facilities and acquisition of those facilities?
That's a great question. We've had conversation with our legislators around the current law, which does provide a provision for charter schools to secure those facilities should they not be used for educational purposes. But there have been waivers provided to school corporations, IPS, that are in this situation. We will continue to have those conversations and ensure that we follow the process of how to properly dispose of those facilities. But we feel like we're in a good place because we have been strong partners with many of the charter schools here in Indianapolis if there's a need to either lease space or utilize space in the district. I think the challenge will be there's not many organizations that will want to take on a facility of 3,000 square feet. And so if we were talking about elementary schools, I think it would be a different conversation. But these are large, comprehensive high schools that are massive.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions?
That's it.
Oh. Any other questions for Dr. Farabee?
I'd just like to say, again, I've said this before, but definitely commend you and the board for innovating, for changing, for proposing these steps that are going to bring more efficiency to, to the school system, and ensuring that as many dollars as possible are not spent on facilities, but are spent on kids. So keep up the good work. Thank you. All this.
Thank you.
Anyone else? So Dr. Freitas, did you have, you're good. At your seat, you had a resolution regarding what you just saw presented. Do we have a motion to accept
So moved.
that?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes. Item C, and then I promise we will take a break. Approval of the 2018 State Board of Ed meeting dates.
So
We have a-
moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. At this time, we will take a break and we'll come back at 10:45.
We are. You're not that quick, are you? Hey, what, Good morning, right? Good morning in New Jersey.
Sherry, how are you? Good to see you again. How are you? I'm well. Good to see you. How's John? That's great. Is my lawyer ran off somewhere? Well, I literally walked out the door. I know I'm gonna give you my card. Yeah. Cool. See you.
I miss her. I do too. I know I looked over the road trip. I do, because I enjoy it. Yeah, I enjoy it. I do. A little soft. Yeah, that's right. Hello there, how are you today? Good. Good. Sure. Actually, yes. Actually, he had been shouting. I said, when I walked in, I said this. I walked in and they had that big list. Same school.
If we can get the state board members to come this way, please. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Our next item on the agenda is item A. Hey, I was a middle school teacher. I can wait on anybody. Okay, then. Sure, Gordon.
I just wanted to say for the record that as it relates to the school grades, even though I've just been advised by counsel and our ethics officer that it's not an issue, I just wanted, for the spirit of transparency, to go on the record and say that I have a business relationship with Phelan Leadership Academy. I just wanted to mention that my vote on all the school grades obviously is not affected, but just wanted to state that for the record.
Thank you. Okay, so the discussion and report, the first item is Next Generation Hoosier Educator Scholarship Update.
Thank you, Superintendent, members of the board, staff, and guests. My name is Zach Smith, and I am the Legislative and Program Manager at the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. And really excited to be here today to give you an update on the Next Generation Hoosier Educator Scholarship. This quickly just you have an administrative housekeeping thing. You've got a white folder in front of you, so you've got a copy of the presentation and a couple other items I'm going to reference throughout the presentation. And for those in the audience, there's some extra copies on the back table. So, briefly, what we're going to discuss throughout the presentation is a little background about the scholarship, the report that the Commission was tasked to do in the first year, our implementation, a summary of our results from year one, and then what we're doing as we are currently soliciting scholarships for year two of the scholarship. So briefly, a little background about the scholarship, and I do want to preference that I know Mr. Hendry has kept you updated for the members of the board who've been on the board the last year on this scholarship. But for the new faces, we've taken 3 presentations we've given to the Commission and tried to put it into one for you today. So happy to take questions throughout. But the scholarship, again, want to give credit to Mr. Hendry for working with Speaker Bosma to make this scholarship a reality. It was in House Enrolled Act 1002 in the 2016 legislative session. And what it does is it provides $7,500 annually to high-achieving students who would agree to teach in the state of Indiana for 5 years. Now, high-achieving is defined as a student who has a class rank in the top 20% of their graduating class or a top 20% score on the ACT or SAT, and it's an OR. And the legislature allocated 200 scholarships to be available each academic year starting with this fall. So we have our first class of next-gen students. As far as renewal, Students are able to receive this scholarship for three additional years while they're pursuing their baccalaureate degree. They must complete 30 credit hours per year, so that'll keep them on track to graduate in 4 years, and maintain a 3.0 GPA or higher, along with any other requirements set by their teacher preparation program. And as I mentioned, the service requirement is once they graduate, they need to teach in an eligible Indiana school for 5 consecutive years. Also, the law charged the Commission last year with doing a study. We were asked to look at other states and programs that they had similar to the Next Gen Scholarship, and that study is the blue copy on the right-hand side of your folder. And then also look at other non-financial program options for recruiting high-achieving students to enter teaching, and that is behind the blue study, and that was done by Thomas P. Miller and Associates on behalf of the Commission, and that nice 36-page study there for you as well. So I don't want to talk a ton about the study, but I think it's important to lay the groundwork for how we set up this scholarship. So the Commission identified 28 different states with teacher scholarships on the books. And we used the NASGAP organization that we work with, who work in student financial aid in various states to identify these programs. And once we had the scan completed, we looked at 10 programs that were most similar to the Next Gen Scholarship. And you'll see those on your slides, the various states. I mean, they represent states in the Midwest and on the coast, so a very good plethora of states that we reached out to and different demographics. And these are the things that we talked to each state about in terms of evaluating their program. How many graduated from their teacher prep programs who utilized the scholarships? How many have completed the scholarship? The service requirements, how many were converted to loans if they were a forgivable scholarship like ours, as well as completing the service requirements. And very quickly, we found that the state of North Carolina and South Carolina really had strong outcomes, and their programs were set up very similar to the framework that the legislature set forth for the Next Gen Scholarship. And the biggest keys to the success of those programs was the rigorous interview process that the scholarship programs utilized, as well as a strong appeals process for students who did receive the scholarship in terms of completing service. So having an opportunity if there was military service, or if an applicant got pregnant and needed to put a year of their service off, defer that. That was very key to the success of their programs. They also utilized pretty intensive on-campus supports in both of these states and a cohort model. If you look at South Carolina's results specifically, and those are found on page 3 of the blue supplement in your folder, 78% of those who entered college with that scholarship actually graduated. And of those graduates, 73% of those were still teaching as of the 2014-15 school year. So very strong outcomes there. And this scholarship required a four-year service commitment, and 65% of the fellows continue teaching 6+ years after receiving the scholarship and completing that service. So again, very, very strong outcomes when you contrast it with the federal Teach Grant. The federal Teach Grant allows recipients to self-select into the program. So if you meet the criteria to apply for the Teach Grant, you can receive that. However, what we found from researching the Teach Grant and looking at a report done by the Government Accountability Office is there's a lot of inflexibility on the requirements of the Teach Grant. So if you don't submit your paperwork by the strict set deadline, your grant will be converted to a loan. And the GAO estimates that 75% of all Teach Grant recipients across the country will have their grants converted to a loan. So we don't want to see that happen with this scholarship. Yes, Dr.
Are there, in any of these case studies, have they identified what percentage of students getting grants were not going into teaching prior to receiving the grants?
That's a great question, and no, we haven't been able to conclusively see whether this was a funding the pipeline per se, or as an incentive for students to take scholarships like this. So unfortunately, we don't have any hard data for that.
In any of these case studies, are students allowed to transition to teaching while they're in college, or use any of these scholarships if they're in another career and want to transition to teaching? Or are these strictly coming from K-12 and trickling to college?
So I know our scholarship was designed to encourage both incoming students and current college students to take advantage. And the plethora of states have various requirements. So I can't think of one that jumps to mind, but our scholarship allows both graduating seniors and current students to take advantage of this opportunity, whether they're already in the teacher prep pipeline or whether they're wanting to change their major.
How do we identify those students if they're in college and they want to transition, they choose to go into teaching? Do we go back to their high school record and determine
So yeah, and I'll get into that, but to be fair to, I mean, we've got two different sets of students, college students and high school students. We looked at every single student based on their high school record. That was the only fair way to judge high school students to college students and not take into consideration anything they might have done in a college
So a college
career.
student would have to meet the high school requirement, top 20, ACT, SAT.
Correct.
To the graduating class.
Correct.
And have at least a 3.0.
No, just they had to have the minimum top 20 graduating or the top 20 score on the ACT or SAT.
So if they're an engineering student, met the high school requirement, has a 2.0, they could transition.
They could, but they're going to have to maintain they have to have a 3.0 to get to keep the scholarship.
All right,
Correct.
thank you.
Yep, no problem.
If I can just add, Vince, to answer your question too, it's not necessarily the intent to get someone who was absolutely considering another career to change their minds based on the scholarship. I think you want 100% of the scholarship applicants as well as recipients to be passionate about getting into teaching and the teaching profession. The idea is that it'll help some students get over the hump on making that, commitment to a long-standing teaching career, as well as once they're graduated and in the classroom, it will help relieve some of the financial burden of a long-standing career, or at least a more than 5-year career in teaching, not having the cost of higher education debt looming over them.
So the intent was not to increase the pipeline of teachers?
The intent was to not necessarily increase the pipeline, but to raise the bar, as well as help students who might not otherwise choose to either go into teaching or remain in teaching after, let's say, 3 years or something, because of economic choices, whether it's because of the cost of higher education.
So if there were 500, just arbitrary, if there were 500 students in the top 20% of their class going into teaching before, so essentially then we're subsidizing 200 students who are already going into teaching. Is that accurate?
Not necessarily. That might be an indirect effect.
Because all those students would be eligible for the scholarship.
Undoubtedly, there would be some students who, regardless of whether they're a scholarship recipient or not, would have chosen to go in to become teachers. However, the intent is that we want to keep not only encourage great students to go into teaching, but keep them in the classrooms. So, and I think this goes a long way to doing that.
Sure. I think it's a great thing for students. I just want to make sure, and I'm really particularly interested as we move along here, thinking about those transition to teaching, inform them, give them those opportunities while they're at university as well. So, great, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Hendry, for the address on that as well.
I have a follow-up question to this line of questioning. You mentioned high school students who may go into teaching or
Correct.
college students who may go into teaching. We've approved a series of alternative pathways for people who may be employed in another profession who see the light of teaching as a great profession that it is.
Absolutely.
And does this scholarship provide money for those who want to transfer from something maybe less productive to teaching?
So they're not explicitly barred from applying. They're just going to have to use their high school credentials to apply for the scholarship. So we did have some students who weren't currently enrolled apply for the scholarship last year.
My other question deals with teacher shortage areas. Have we earmarked a percentage of the money for those areas in which we see shortages in Indiana?
So this scholarship doesn't designate anything specifically for shortage areas. I do know that we are asking this year in the application what areas students are interested in, just for informational purposes, because that's something that we were questioned on last year. So we'll have a better idea of where students are interested in actually teaching. But the law allows a lot of flexibility for students to choose what school they want to teach in, what grade they want to teach in. The key is that they're going to teach in a K through 12 classroom for 5 years in an eligible Indiana school.
So would it take legislation to change it to focus in on teacher areas? Maybe 10% of the scholarship could go for that? It would
Correct.
Take legislation?
Legislation. I mean, the commission is given some flexibility to decide rules around this program, but I think we would want to have a firmer designation from the legislature if they do want to go down the teacher shortage pathway with this particular program. Yes.
Thanks.
Yep. And Speaker Bosma was very clear when this legislation was going through that this isn't intended to solve the teacher shortage issue. It's really intended to raise the bar, teaching in the classroom, making it easier for teachers to stay in the class.
Absolutely. All right, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we implemented in year one and what we learned now. We had a very short implementation window. This passed in late March of 2016, and we opened our application in November of that year. So not only did we have to study what other states were doing, build an application, decide how we were going to build the program. So in November, we opened up our application, but part of that process was we wanted to get educators involved based on some best practices we learned that the state of Illinois uses in a program similar to NextGen, and that is having actual educators nominate the students for this scholarship. So we have a nomination form that current educators fill out for the student who's applying, and then they take that same nomination form and they have a school official, a guidance counselor, or someone at the college level actually verify that academic information, that they are in the top 20%. So we have that on paper, a nominator and verified academic information, and they then submitted that form along with the questions that we asked on our application online. And we had the application window open from November 1 to December 31st of 2016. In January, the commission then took all of that information, and we used the criteria on our application to decide which students we were going to offer an interview. So we were looking at that academic information, high school and community involvement, which was actually specifically called out by the legislature and the law as something that we were supposed to take into consideration for choosing finalists. We looked at employment, we looked at awards and honors, and then we had a writing prompt. We asked students to tell us in 500 words or less, why do you want to be a teacher? So that prompt has changed for this upcoming application, but lots of great essays came from that to help us determine our finalists, and we sent our offers out on January 31st for our interviews. We held interviews in the month of March. We had 3 weekends of interviews, and I want to thank member Carrie Wicker for attending one of the interview days. We really appreciate you coming out and being a part of the process. The interviews utilized educators, community leaders, legislators, and teacher prep faculty from across the state. We really wanted folks who are actually in classrooms and know about the profession to help us to decide who were the best of the best and who were really committed. And as I mentioned, the students were asked 6 questions. They were all standard, the interviews, so all asked the same questions, and they were asked to give a 5-minute presentation to their interviewers. And they were asked, they were given that prompt in advance, but they were asked what qualities are needed to be an effective teacher. So each one of those finalists gave that presentation and were evaluated on that. In terms of the awarding process, we notified every single student who was a finalist on April 11th of this year what their status was, and they were either selected, put on our wait list, or denied. And then once the selected students were given that designation, then they needed to accept and complete a promissory note for the actual money part of the scholarship before we dispersed the award. And The promissory notes went out in August 1st of this year, and most every single one of the 200 students has signed those promissory notes.
Zach, are these last dollar scholarships?
No. So this is a stackable scholarship that can be used with other scholarships, and it can go up to cost of attendance. So a student can utilize the full amount, or after all other scholarships are taken into account, then it'll be reduced. But the goal of this was to help pay for beyond tuition and fees, but to pay for living expenses, room and board. I guess those are the same, but textbooks, et cetera, up to a cost of attendance based on where they're attending.
So they have to apply for financial aid.
Right. Part of this, the commission, I mean, we're the financial aid administrator for the state, so they would have to complete a FAFSA to receive the award. So briefly, I know Mr. Hendry showed this last year, but when you have some new members on the board, the law asked for us to create a promotional campaign. So this is a brand new scholarship. Nobody had heard of this thing before unless you were following the legislature. So Ron's going to play our TV ad that ran last year.
Remember your favorite teacher? The one who made learning fun? The one who inspired? The one who made a difference? That's the kind of teacher I want to be. And that's why I'm glad Indiana offers the Next Generation Teacher. Pay $7,500 per year. We're committed to teaching. You ready? Need to make a difference? Play at learnmoreindiana.org.
On the next slide, you'll see we had a PSA very similar to that ad that was on multiple radio stations across the state. That TV ad was on 19 stations, so we really wanted to get a broad reach, and the legislature gave us some money to actually market that. I mean, the commission didn't make that. We worked with a marketing firm here in town to create such a great promotional and uplifting ad to promote the profession. We also, the firm did some online ads with us through social media, paid searches, and a Google search. So you can see all the results there. But the commission didn't stop right there. We had a very broad-based outreach plan that the commission, utilizing our current staff, did to work with community partners to get the word out about this scholarship. Some of the things we did were reach out to all the guidance counselors via Counselor Talk email. We used the department's readily available superintendent and principal list to email every superintendent and high school principal across the state about this opportunity. We reached out to every teacher cadet program in the state to let them know about this opportunity. We emailed every single one of our minority teacher scholarship applicants about this opportunity. And obviously working with Institutes for Higher Ed, letting them know, letting their current applicants know and their current students know about this opportunity. So doing everything that we could to let folks know, and in that last month really target areas that we were seeing low applications coming in. And you actually have a handout in your folder, but it's a map of where all of our applicants actually came from. We had 642 applicants in the first year, which we felt really good about. We're hoping to see more than that. Our internal goal is 1,000 this year. That represented 275 high schools and 85 of our 92 counties. So we felt really good about where our applicants came from. In terms of the finalists, of those 642, we had 406 finalists, so that represented 63%. And I do want to note that all 642 of our applicants met that top 20% designation. So the application wouldn't let you move forward if you had something below those areas. So the finalists represented 222 high schools and 82 of our 92 counties. I think the biggest thing to note on this slide is just the sheer academic profile of these students. 29 on the ACT on average. That's in the top 9% of the ACT. 1280 on the new SAT, which is in the top 11%. And a class rank higher than 9%, the top 9% of your class. And then for our recipients, our 200 recipients, and that's on the back side of your map, where those folks come from, 145 high schools, 71 of our 92 counties. 128 of those students are first-time freshmen this fall. So again, really encouraging students who are entering college to enter into education but also funding 72 of our returning undergraduate students as well. And you can see with the arrows that our academic information even went up with our recipients. Top 7% in their class, 1290 went up 10 points on the new SAT and 10 points on the old SAT. ACT remained the same, but we have more students across the state taking SAT versus the ACT. And there's that map. I don't want to belabor this too much more, but this shows you how the students qualified, and it's really encouraging that over 51% of our applicants had a test score that made them qualify for the scholarship, so they weren't using just class rank alone. However, the law didn't require them to give us all their information, so our applicants decided to put their best foot forward, and this is just the information that we have on our recipients. You can see, based on where our recipients told us they were going, the top 5 institutions for public and private schools that where these scholarships are being utilized. Ball State was number 1 with 41, followed by Bloomington, West Lafayette, Indiana State, and IPFW. Our private schools, top 1 was Taylor University, Indiana Wesleyan, University of Indianapolis, Grace College, and Manchester University. All in total, our 200 recipients are going to 29 different institutions of higher ed across the state. So a wide swath of schools where these recipients are attending. So quickly, what are we doing different in year 2 than year 1? And number 1 is just a renewed focus on getting this opportunity to minority students, to men, and to the regions where we had no applicants. So we're really here to double down and work with the department, with the state board, with our institutions of higher education to really be all-encompassing and work hard to move these numbers, because our Title II reports show that we have work to do to get minorities and men in the classroom and recruited into the field of education. So we're really focused on trying to get this opportunity to more of those students. We also opened the application earlier this year, so it's been open for a month. We've had 153 students start the application. We've got 9 students who've actually already completed it, so we're getting there. I do want you to know that of those 642 applications last year, over half of them came in the last 2 days. So students procrastinated. And this year, the application is going to close on November 30th. So with the fall break starting now, hopefully we're going to see some applications creep up. And then over Thanksgiving, see applications creep up. But it's part of our Scholar Track application, which is for all state financial aid that the Commission utilizes. And so I would hopefully more students will know about the opportunity by using Scholar Track. We have our interview dates already established, which is going to be helpful. We're going to have 1 fewer day, but again, we're going to use 3 weekends, 7 different sites. And quickly, the timeline there, I mentioned that it's open. It closes on the 30th. In January 5th, we'll have all of December to figure out who we're going to interview. And on the 5th of January, we'll notify our finalists. We're going to do our interviews a month early, so knock on wood, no snow, hopefully. February 10th, 17th, and 24th. And then in April, we'll notify our recipients. In June, we'll send out those promissory notes. So you can see we've selected our sites, so mark your calendars. I'd love for all the state board to be involved in this and help interview in your respective areas. Last year we had them at high schools. This year all of them are going to be at the Ivy Tech locations, with the exception of Jasper, which will be at the Vincennes campus. So really excited to get folks involved. All of our interviewers last year were really excited to be involved again, and we're hoping that as this scholarship becomes more ingrained, that we'll get more folks from the education community involved in helping interview these students for such a prestigious award. With that, take any other questions.
Zach, I do have a question. So with all the conversation going on, and we heard today even from IPS about an academy for teaching and trying to incentivize, that's happening across the state. Right now it's high wage, high demand, so it's one of those pathways that's under review, and a ton of funding is going to go that way. But I promise you, not everybody who's in that pathway is going to hit the top 20%.
Right.
What is the plan for alignment? We're putting all of our resources up front into that pathway. Where's that continuation plan? I love this, so I'm not being critical of what we're doing because I think it's great. But if we're going to be smart with our resources and try to keep that continuation and incentivize them to then go on and actually utilize what they just captured in K-12, Is there a plan or is there discussion about that with this type of scholarship, or is that a completely different conversation?
I think that's a little bit of a different conversation.
Okay.
I know the commission stands ready to work with you and the department and the state board to really think comprehensively about how do we incentivize everyone to take advantage of going into this great profession.
Wouldn't it be nice if Senator Cruz's LA was here, or Representative Bainings, to hear that idea and take it back? That'd be great. Just saying.
I'm sure there are
No.
communication
Well
channels.
noted.
Yeah.
Texting right now.
Dr.
Yeah,
Burchell.
that's good. Just really two questions quickly. And again, I'm excited about anything that we can do, and we've talked about this over the last couple of years. Anything we can do to incentivize people to go into this profession. It's absolutely critical for our state and our nation. We have people going into teaching to attract our best and brightest.
Absolutely.
Any effort we can put. My question really, one is, does this convert to a loan for anyone leaving the teaching profession before they complete their year of service? I presume there's some prorated.
Yeah, so the state, we've been very explicit throughout our process that there is a clawback to this. So if you accept the scholarship, any amount of it and don't complete the 5 years of service, then this does convert to a loan.
As prorated?
Correct. So we're not going to, it will start once the student has finished higher ed or leaves higher ed for whatever reason.
So every year there's a reduction in the payback.
Correct.
Right?
So if you teach
4 out of 5.
Right. So each year you'll get 20% of your loan forgiven.
So we had 642 applicants. We awarded 200. So about a third of these individuals received grants. You're hoping for 1,000 applicants. Do we have a way of tracking what happens to the non-recipients?
We know who they are. So working with, we've got good information. I know all of our waitlisted students we're hoping will reapply because that's an opportunity for them. They were obviously close, but no, I think we have opportunities there to use that
Well,
information.
the reason I ask, I think there's also something pretty powerful about the market signal to the teachers. That we're putting out this grant, the state's investing in them, even those who don't get the grant. I think there's still a signal that's sent to
Right.
them that we value teaching, and I'm curious how many will go on to pursue teaching. I presume it would be a high percentage. It would just be interesting to find out how many
Absolutely.
enter the profession. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Hager?
No questions, just a couple of comments.
Okay.
And this is a great report, concise, appropriate data, and got right to the point. And one thing I really appreciate is you've looked at year one and year two, you've tweaked some things to make your efforts even more effective. So well done. And Mr. Henry, thanks for your input on this and your efforts.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Sure.
Just to comment, I would encourage everybody to participate in the process. It was so well organized and well run, and I know it was on all over the state, and lots of people involved. And also, as Dr. Burke said, just get that message out that lots of people are participating and lots of people are involved, and so the more put that message. But it was well done.
Thank you.
Good job.
I would just like to thank you for coming here and giving us this great
Absolutely.
update. And I know that, especially in year one, it was a challenge putting all this together. And I'd just like to say on behalf of myself, and I think I speak for the board, in saying that CHE has done a tremendous job. So kudos to Commissioner Lovers and her team on a very successful implementation. Under a little bit under the gun, but I'm excited about year two and the success of the program.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next on the discussion and reports would be Gary Community Schools turnaround update.
Good morning. My name is Peggy Hinckley. I am the emergency manager for Gary Community School Corporation. Before I begin, I do want to say that as I've been in this role for 2 months, I was an Indiana school superintendent for 28 and a half years, but when I retired in 2012, I learned in stepping in this role a few things have changed. And so I just want to express my extreme gratitude to the Indiana Department of Education. I've had the opportunity to meet with Dr. McCormick on 2 occasions personally. I have had numerous communications with Dr. Kwiatkowski, Mrs. Bagala, of course, who's counsel for the IDOE. But I want to tell you, the guy who has probably saved our bacon more days than I can tell you is Nathan Williamson with Title I. Because when we arrived in Gary, there were resources that needed to be properly spent. Where are you, Nathan? If I ever get back to finding time to bake cookies, I owe you a ration, believe me. Chocolate chip, right? I mean, I don't know what we would have done without his guidance. And so I just want to say that obviously this is a new role for the state of Indiana, but I am grateful to have so many people in the Indiana Department of Education that were here to assist us. Today we bring before you a plan for Beveridge and Marquette Elementary Schools within the Gary Community School Corporation. I'd like to introduce the team that has come with us. First of all, in addition to myself as a part of the management team, Dr. Jim Meza, who is our Chief Operating Officer. Dr. Meza is retired superintendent from Louisiana, who without him, he's the detail guy on the curriculum and instruction side. That has been very important. Dr. Lucia Washington, who's our lead academic person, longtime principal in Gary who retired, and when I said, I need you, she said, I'll be there tomorrow. Leslie Green, who's a longtime Gary Community School Corporation person, who's our accountability specialist, and who really is focused on a lot of the teacher evaluation things that we need to put into place. And then our principals from Beveridge, Cheryl Ramsey, and from Marquette, Angela Johnson, who will be speaking with you. I also want to thank Mrs. Lauderdale for being here, longtime Gary parent and grandparent, and she's reminded me that I have a little work to do in the parent involvement area, so I do want to reassure you that between 2 and 4 a.m. I'm going to begin to work on that because it is very important that we share our plan, but of course we put it together working hard. I just want to give you a general overview of how we've tried to approach these schools. First of all, we know that historically our proficiency rates have been very poor. And so we have looked hard at we know what the research says about time and conditions of learning. And so we know that as we try to look at what are we going to do, essentially day one when teachers reported, we were able to get from some neighbor, it's not uncommon for districts today to use either curriculum maps or pacing guides, whatever you might call them. And so we put those in place. We had maps from Anderson that they contributed. They've been doing that for a long time. And I think maybe Shenandoah, I'm not sure. But we've gotten some curricular maps aligned to ISTEP standards in Indiana to make sure that our curriculum had some consistency. Because as you all know, it shouldn't matter who you get to 4th grade is what you learn because the assessment is the same. We now use formative assessments on a monthly window of standards. We then use that to then drive what in these 2 schools will be, we have in all the elementary schools a daily success period or a tutorial enrichment. But in these 2 schools, it will be 1 for math and 1 for language arts every day. Because what we know about in the mastery learning research about what we called correctives in the old days is that if we do that as we go, we're going to have a better result of getting children back on track. And so in these schools, we have that plan, but additionally what we looked at is we know we needed additional time because of our proficiency rates. So we're going to have a second team of fresh quarterbacks and wide receivers. I guess I can say that since tomorrow we're getting, or Saturday, Peyton Manning's going to have his jersey retired. So since I lived in Indianapolis a long time, I pay attention to that. But we're going to say that we have teachers teaching during the day, but we need fresh people to work with children in more engaging ways. One of the things that I've learned in meeting with local campuses like IU Northwest, Purdue Northwest, is that we want to recruit their education majors with 60 hours or more that can come in after school as subs to provide active and engaging lessons that are different from perhaps a more traditional approach during the day. I also believe those teachers during the day have to have enough energy to work a longer day. We will be feeding children because of our poverty level. We already have universal breakfast and lunch. In these two schools, we will add dinner. Not a snack, but dinner, because we know that children will be hungry, and if we feed them first, and then because of bus schedules, because we have 3-tiered busing, it's probably about a 2.5-hour time. So we want to make sure children are comfortable and have food before we begin to then do this more active and engaging work in helping build proficiency. So that's the overall plan that we have presented to you today. And I want to invite Dr. Meza to share with you the process for how we did this. And, 6 weeks into it, to know we have to come before you, I want to say we did our very best, but if we had a little more time, I hope we would have done a little more, but we have tried hard.
Good morning, Dr. McCormick, members of the board. When we entered this phase 1 of our interventions, in particular for these two schools, we established 3 statements. One was we have to act with a sense of urgency. 2, an unwavering commitment to student achievement. And 3rd, that drastic change is necessary. With those guiding principles, we began to look at why 2 schools have failed, one for 5 years consecutively, one for 6 years. We looked at the major components of schoolings. We started out with our students. Why is it that our students are not more successful in these schools? Secondly, we looked at the quality of teaching, and we looked at the teaching. What was shocking about the teachers is that it was like moving back 20 years. We were very traditional in how we were organized in our delivery, and we taught the class as a whole. We have to shift to a much more differentiated classroom delivery, trying to meet the needs of every child every day. We also looked at leadership at the building level. We found that our principals are very hardworking. However, they did not understand instructional leadership. They could not recognize instructional problems. They were not highly effective in using data to solve problems. And they were poor time managers, and that is, they were not allowed to look at instruction in classrooms because they were distracted mostly by management issues throughout the school day. We also looked at the central office. What type of supports was the central office giving our schools? One principal told me that she got a call on one day, the next day she got the keys, and that was the last she heard from the central office. So the central office was not systematic in supporting the needs of schools. We have to change that dramatically. We also looked at our parents. Not surprisingly, some of our parents for educational disadvantaged communities have had bad experience in schools. They don't like school as much as we like school. We have to change that attitude. We also found out that our customer service in addressing parents was very poor, that we have to be more inviting and more positive in dealing with them. We looked at curriculum, we looked at the instruction, as I mentioned, and we looked at the organization. What's significant about the organization is that the day is abbreviated at a 6-hour full day. Now that's on the contract. We hope to change that next year, but we needed much more time for instruction other than 6 hours. These are some of our responses. First of all, in curriculum, every teacher now has an instructional guide that allows them to understand content, which is a major weakness in our teaching force, and them understanding the content that our children are prepared to know. We also developed a clear pacing chart, and every teacher will receive personal support from a proven practitioner in helping them understand content and helping them with delivery. We will use the 8-step process uniform throughout the district is our primary framework for delivering instruction every day. Every child now has a new textbook through the efforts of Nathan mentioned earlier and the Department of Education. Our textbooks were severely outdated. Every child now has a current textbook, and the content and the standards are aligned with ISTEP. We have a good foundation which was lacking before. Technology was in the schools, but it was not fully integrated in curriculum. That'll be a major shift. We had a lot of software purchased, but it wasn't used to deal with the needs of children. District-wide formative assessment was lacking. We had no benchmarking throughout the year. We'll begin to benchmark every 3 weeks informally, and then formally once a quarter using a benchmark system that's aligned through Pivot and with the state standards. Our common approach to instructional delivery will be extremely important because we do have high mobility across our district. By using the 8-step process, as children move from school to school, they'll be using the same curriculum, the same textbook, as well as the same delivery message. We also will try to build demonstration classes at each school so they understand what is a real effective teacher looks like and what type of environment does she create in her classroom. As Dr. Hinckley mentioned, the organization day has been shifted dramatically. We've added 90 more minutes of instruction in math and language arts. Math is in single digits with one of the schools. Single digit performance of students. It is drastically underserved. Mainly because our teachers do not understand the content. So what we're going to have to do is tying into that instructional day is that we're going to have a tremendous amount of professional development to raise their understanding of teaching materials as well as content, as well as instructional strategies that our children can have a deeper understanding of mathematics and the application of math. Math will also be taught across the curriculum in science and in social studies, along with English and language arts. We'll also extend the school day for an extra 2 hours, 3 days a week. And we counted the days yesterday, and we have 49 days to April testing. Obviously, for applied testing, it's shorter, so we don't have a lot of time. So the sense of urgency is here now. We'll start to implement this because we have to hire additional personnel. We'll implement this beginning November 1st. The 2 principals in our schools will have a principal mentor. This is a person who has been successful with a similar population school. She will be with them 2 days a week for each school for a total of 4 days. Professional development will be expanded on 3 levels: the classroom level, the grade level, and the district level. For example, at the district level, you would have general professional development around the 8-step process. At the grade level, we'll look at content standards and how to deliver that content and standards to a particular grade level. And thirdly, we'll have job-embedded professional development as these outside consultants, proven practitioners, will come in and work with the individual teachers in their classroom. One of the major challenges of our teachers is teacher attendance. On average, across the district, attendance rate's about 90%. If you factor that over 180 instructional days, that's 18 days that a teacher is not out. We also have 2 or 3 sections, 2 or 3 grade levels with full-time substitutes. We have to change that immediately. We can't advance without quality teaching in the classroom. We're going to impose, we were going to launch teacher incentives to hire new teachers, as well as Dr. Hinckley said, develop partnerships with area universities and private providers such as New Teacher Project and others. That pretty much gives you a quick summary. Our principals now will give you a more detailed report, and I'd like to call up Ms. Cheryl Ramsey.
Can we ask a quick question? Go ahead.
I had a question about some of the things you were talking about. You were talking about principal mentorship and extended hours. On the other hand, you were talking about 8-step processing and mapping. Which are things you're implementing at the schools that we're talking about at Beveridge and Marquette, and which are you talking about, or are you talking about district-wide or at other struggling schools? Is this strictly at these two buildings?
The extended day is at these two buildings. And the 90-day instructional block that we're shifting, in other words, we're going to integrate math and language arts and social studies and science using that time really to focus on another 30 minutes of math. These are called success periods. We have 2 additional success periods during the day. And, but these are only for these 2 schools. Now, we may move that to other schools, but this is our priority right now.
So the curriculum, that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Because
The HSTEP process
sometimes
is
you talk about
district-wide.
HSTEP process and curriculum maps being district-wide, and then you would flip to the others, and so I was trying to figure out whether we were
Yeah.
talking about district-wide or in the 2 buildings.
All right, thank you.
Good morning. Beveridge School is the only comprehensive traditional public school on the west side of Gary. Last year, we ended our school year with 417 students. We have 93% free and reduced lunch, and we service 7% special needs, which includes multiple handicapped students, mildly cognitive disorder, intermediate, and primary. We also, last year, were staffed with 4 long-term assignment substitutes in grades 4 and 6. Over the past 4 years, 2 closing schools have merged with Beveridge, Jefferson, and Brunswick, and they were both chronically underperforming schools. At one time, Beveridge was surrounded by thriving businesses and homes. We now are surrounded by shuttered businesses and abandoned homes. As we have looked at our scores over the years, our passing rates for English and math have been very low, single digits in math, and historically, we've had a letter grade of F. After looking at the data and analyzing it and looking at the root cause analysis, as Dr. Meza pointed out, we've established a goal to increase our language arts performance by 20 percentage points. One way of looking at that is to target the instruction for the 90-minute ELA block that we currently have. We also looked at our math, which is in the single digits over the years, and to increase math performance by 15 percentage points. As mentioned earlier, we are extending our math block from 60 minutes to 90 minutes, and we're also adding a 30-minute success period each day, which would be just for math. So we have 1 for ELA and 1 for math. Our third goal would be to increase our mathematics growth performance by 10 percentage points and our ELA growth by 15 percentage points. We also looked at attendance. We wanted to maintain attendance rate for our students of 96% or higher. We looked at recognizing perfect and approved attendance and working with our families to resolve issues that contribute to chronic absences among our students. We looked at many interventions. Probably the most powerful is the one that would extend our school day, 2 hours a day for 3 days a week. And as Dr. Hinckley mentioned, partnering with local universities to get people to come in to do that after school or the extended day instruction, and we would be focused on math and language arts. For the first time in 10 years, teachers have in their possessions new textbooks for reading. Math is on the way. So the textbook representative would be providing teachers with training in their core content materials in reading and math. I'm sorry.
I have a question. How does that happen in this state? I mean, I'm just curious, how does it happen that we have children with textbooks that are 10 years or older in a state that pays for textbooks?
I believe that's a question above.
I'm just curious. I've heard it a couple times.
That's a good question. I don't know, but I can tell you this. The book rental rates in Gary are $10 for a kindergarten child, $30 for a third grade child, And of course, we all know that is not at all comparable to any district in like the universe. So this year, because of, I had a reading teacher, or a first grade teacher come up to me, and of course, America's gathering place known as Costco, and say to me, Dr. Hinckley, I teach first grade and I don't have any reading books. And so working with Title I, and we did not file a textbook reimbursement this year because of the fact that we paid for textbooks. I don't understand it. It's been difficult to get a root cause as to how that happened or why it happened. But first of all, if you're not charging adequate funds for book rental, and because we are high poverty, we could be regaining that money through the proper reimbursement process. But it was a commonplace complaint that we heard from principals that they simply didn't have textbooks. But I haven't been able to identify where that train went off the track. I'm sorry, I can't give you a better answer.
No, I appreciate it.
But I'll
Thank
give you
you.
an honest.
So the district has invested in Pivot. So teachers will be trained in Pivot to assess student learning and to disaggregate data. The principal mentor, in addition to working directly with me, will train teachers and in the 8-step instructional process. And I might also mention that my principal mentor has been on board and worked with me and sent me a schedule for next week, so that is up and running. In addition to the district professional development, we have school and grade level professional development, where teachers will learn how to unpack standards by grade level and how to scaffold instruction in ELA and math. Teachers will also be trained in effective lesson design, disaggregating data, and in cultural competency. And last is our job embedded PD. Dr. Meza mentioned this, that we would set up a model classroom for teachers to come in and see what it looks like. The primary and intermediate teacher would sort of be going around and assisting other teachers in developing those classrooms, helping them utilizing the math and literacy framework. And last, we have math and ELA coaches that have been assigned to Beveridge. They've conducted their first PD last week, and I got very positive feedback from my teachers. Any questions?
Received additional reconnaissance with regard to your question, Dr. Bertram. It appears that $350,000 was received last year in textbook reimbursement, but as would be demonstrated by the previous audits, there was commingling of funds, money that would be attributed to one thing that was now just paying general fund expenditures. So while it was received that way, it was spent for general fund expenditures and not for the purchase of textbooks. Sorry, forgot my little job here. I would now like to introduce Principal Angela Johnson from Marquette Elementary.
Good morning. My name is Angela Johnson. I'm the principal of Marquette Elementary School, and we are located in the northeast section of Gary, in the Miller section. Our mission is to educate students for career and college readiness by connecting instruction to real life experiences. And in order to do that, we know that we have to have an accelerated learning experience to continue improvement at Marquette. Marquette is a K-6 elementary school. We roughly have about 399 students. 75% of those students receive free and reduced lunch. 11% are special needs. And it is important to note that Marquette has had 5 principals in the last 5 years. I am principal number 6. Although we have made improvements in ISTEP this past year, we do know that we need to accelerate that improvement. So as far as our growth in student performance, we were happy with the growth, but we know we need to accelerate that more so that we can see that return in performance for our students in ELA and math. The first goal of our school is to increase the language arts by performance by 20 percentage points. And in order to do that, we feel that in those 90-minute blocks, as Dr. Meza mentioned, we need to have those blocks more intentional instead of whole group learning. They need to be more focused learning blocks where teachers can do more intentional and address the needs of each student. And also embedding that additional success period that will be specifically geared toward language arts remediation will help us achieve that goal. And our second goal is to increase math performance by at least 15 percentage points. We have already increased our math block from 60 minutes to 90 minutes in grades 3 through 6. And again, to make sure we have that intentional instruction for those students in math as well, particularly the math processes and the application where we see our weaknesses. And the extended learning day for 2 hours, we think will actually, or we really believe that will help, because last year Marquette did have an extended day program for 12 weeks. But of course, with limited funding and limited resources, there was just so much you could do with that. So now that we have the resources, now that we have the extended day for 2 hours, and the plan with Dr. Hinckley and Dr. Meza, we believe that we can accomplish that goal. And our third goal is, in turn, to increase that growth performance by about 15%. And of course, the success periods mentioned previously will help us with that, because that will target those students not only who are below level, but those students who may be on level, helping them maintain, and those students who are above level, and making sure that they continue to grow. And lastly, our fourth goal is to make sure that we have highly qualified, certified teachers. Marquette has had a great turnover. We've had teachers to retire, and replacing those retired teachers has been a challenge. So making sure that we don't have long-term assignment teachers or substitute teachers, but rather highly qualified teachers to, re-implement or replace those teachers who have either resigned or retired is a goal of ours as well. Everything else, our intensive strategy is exactly what Ms. Ramsey just mentioned. Both schools are on the same plan. We intend to have a 2-hour extended day, which gives us an additional day actually, because that's 6 hours per week. So that's another additional day of learning for our students. And the additional success time, instead of alternating success periods every day or every week, they will get it daily. So hopefully those intensive strategies will definitely increase our scores and our performance. At the district level, we are, again, taking advantage of the training that's being offered. I am a second-year principal, so I really, really appreciate it. The training in both the 8-step process and the data. We are all registered for the safety procedures conference that's coming up. All of us have registered, so we're looking forward to that. And also at the school level, working with the our new director of special education, as far as how we can better serve those students in special education classes, helps teachers with curriculum map development and so forth. And lastly, the job embedded training that Ms. Ramsey also mentioned, where the ELA coaches and the math coaches have already been to my building. They've already observed a lot of teachers, and I'm giving really good feedback, as well as the principal mentors that we've worked with for the past week. Questions?
Thank you.
I do need to correct in answer to your question. 9 through 12, they had done some calendar work on their own. So rather than upset that apple cart, and we're not doing success periods, they're on trimesters. So we're trying to evaluate all of that because one of the issues before us will be when your enrollment is about 5,000 students supporting 2 high schools is not economically feasible. So what we're trying to do, and of course no one wants to hear that from me, but you know, I'm interested in laying that groundwork now. So we're trying to look at what one comprehensive high school would look like in Gary. So we aren't doing that. They do have some maps, but we weren't involved in the development of those. So to finish and then certainly answer your questions, any plan is only as good as the monitoring of that plan. And there's a reason I wrote a book about that a while ago, and not that I'm promoting it because I'm not. It was a different life and a different time. But I would say this, we have secured, working with, you know, the great news of some people who are retired and still want to step back in, mentor principal with experience in working with curriculum maps and formative assessments and all of that, who will be assigned to these 2 schools to work. Additionally, I have 4 curriculum people that are in the field. In the beginning, they were here every day. Now we're looking, their time will be more on a monthly basis, but they are, for example, this week, the elementary curriculum people were looking at the data meetings and how we were conducting those in the respective elementary schools. Because what I know is no matter what you write in a plan, unless someone's monitoring it, it's not going to happen. And so we will be ferocious about doing that. So I'm happy to take your questions.
First, I just want to commend Dr. Hinckley and her team. Their onboarding process at Gary Community School Corporation was nothing short of phenomenal. And to think that they actually have been there working, I think the day I saw it online in the newspaper, she was already over there. It was just great. And they've jumped right in and have done this even before, you know, without a state contract, formal state contract at the time. So I just really commend you all for the immediate response to what really is a crisis situation. And there's no way, I mean, everyone should just know, there is no way that an RFP or an RFQ could have ever captured the condition that these teams and companies bid on to come in and address this situation. So whatever she may have thought they were bidding on or proposing to deal with is in fact much different, because you just couldn't put in an RFP and RFQ a lot of this stuff, as you're hearing.
And I do want to share with you, thank you, Mr. Weather, that we had, we were appointed on July 31st, and at 9 a.m., I drove back to the region, as we call it, and at 8:30 that night, after being appointed by the Distress Unit Appeals Board, we had a meeting. I mean, I texted all the people that were going to be arriving. We had an 8:30 meeting that night, and we were there, about 10, 12 people in the district by 9 a.m. the next day, and we've had, but I also want to say that we've also had, you know, there are people within the Gary Community School Corporation that care deeply about this school community, and they have been waiting for leadership to put it back on the right track. And yes, we have those people that hope we fail, but we focus on the people that are trying to succeed, because every day I remember the children I saw opening day, and I know that we have not served them in the manner in which our public has entrusted us. So that's our focus. We're here to help them and to make some rapid turnaround. There is no time to have a 3-year plan. We've had to move quite quickly, and so sometimes moving that quickly creates some consternation, but I don't apologize for that, because I think the data would indicate that that's what we need to do.
I wasn't quite finished.
I apologize.
Sorry. I just want to say I have confidence in your team and that you're definitely already improving the situation there. I understand that because of the new legislation, that this body isn't really involved in a way that we would be in other Public Law 221 interventions, and that's fine. And I just appreciate you taking the time to come update us, even though this is now really under the purview, both academically and financially, of the Indiana Distress Unit Appeals Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Dr. Freitas?
Peggy, thanks for your service and the service of your team.
Yes, sir.
Going into a situation that is difficult at best, and let's not revisit the past. Let's look to the future,
Right.
and
Absolutely.
your presentation's uplifting. First question deals with the scope of your authority, particularly with personnel and financial. What authority do you have to deal with those two issues in particular?
Under Senate Enrolled Act 567, the emergency manager has the authority of the school board as well as the superintendent. The superintendent serves as a resource to the emergency manager. And so it is, I am responsible to the Distress Unit Appeals Board, and I not only have weekly calls with them, plus a weekly report, plus appear in front of them every month. So we are responsible to them. And then we have a fiscal management board, which is a new creation in the law that is advisory to me as the emergency manager. We will be presenting our budget next week to them, the 2018 budget. And then, so they serve as, if you will, again, advisory. And the school board continue to meet with them monthly. They are limited by statute to one meeting a month. But in that meeting, they can make recommendations to me to take under advisement. So I do have not only the financial side of the house, but the academic side. I have the whole deal.
Over the years, we've been involved with some financial issues, and I look at my friend, Mr. Walker, and we expended state money on things like boilers and other kinds of things. But we're now looking back, we're looking to the future. And you're making some fairly significant changes, and I have to tell you, I agree 100% on what you and others have said about the progress. And I'm curious about, once you bring in a new paradigm to an organization, what percentage of school leaders that were in the prior regime are still there, and what percentage of teachers who were in the prior regime are still there?
Well, I think the question that is important to understand is that my understanding of the history, and again, I'm not trying to, I don't have enough time for all that, but that when Dr. Myrtle Campbell was superintendent, near the end of her, which was at least 5 years ago, the end of her tenure, or near the end of that, the school board eliminated the curriculum office and the professional development office. So when you look at a central office, one might assume that we have lots of people. We really don't. So there hasn't been a lot of support for principals at the building level to know what to do or who to get help from. So I learned long ago that I'm going to assume that because they've not received that guidance and support, that I'm going to give, we're requiring them now. We have a required Tuesday meeting from 3 to 5 on that are curriculum issues where we are providing knowledge to them. How do you look at your data? How do you explain you should have those data chats? How do you have them individually with teachers? I mean, we have someone that only one child out of 100 and some children in math passed. That's a serious conversation. We need to know how to have that conversation. We need to be including that in the observation evaluation process. So right now what we're trying to do, and then we have a mandatory meeting on Wednesdays from 3 to 5 to deal with other things as it relates to the school district. So right now, I'm assuming that they need information. And then clearly, they have to perform. And so I think we give them the proper support, but then we have to meet the timelines under the law with regard to notice. And I think it's too early right now. I will tell you, I have already made one principal reassignment. And those of you who know my personality know that I'm not inclined to be fearful of that. You have to do what we have to do, but we have to get the right leaders in the right place to make the changes, because this is hard. It's hard to change the paradigm. And what I know is if we're not fearless about it, we will simply go back to the old way of doing things, which will, of course, we will not get the results we need. We are not providing the quality education to the children of Gary that our public expects us to, and we need to step it up in great measures right now.
Sounds like you're changing the culture
We're
of a
certainly
community.
trying.
And some of us have talked about that and seeing a need for that, although we weren't directly involved
Understand.
in that. Because you're changing the culture of a community, what's been the reaction of parents in particular and students?
Well, my staff understands that. Ms. Lauderdale, you want to answer that? Would you like to? I'll invite Ms. Lauderdale. She's been at, let me just say this, we have had 3 community engagement meetings. I think right now we have lots of questions about what we're going to do. But I think it's fair to say that in any organization, when you make dramatic change, you are going to have those people that are going to speak out against it. And I think that's fair. I think parents are waiting to see. I think many of them have entrusted us, but many of them have left us because we have not served their children well. But I'm going to invite Ms. Lauderdale to, because I think she has a better feel for that.
Once again, thank you, board. You know, it wasn't too long ago I came before you and told you that I worked with the Title I program for the past 20 years. And I want to thank you for saying that we can't look back. We must forge ahead. I always tell you guys that as a family, we are a family of educators for all the children in the state of Indiana. And yes, I traveled back to Northwest Indiana in support. Dr. Kwankowski, thank you so much, because I tore up a tire on I-65 trying to get to a meeting. But that's okay. God got me there. I'd like to thank Dr. Hinckley. I'd like to thank her team. It was not easy to come into a situation in which parents and the community felt like they had been abandoned. And they have did everything they could, from the cleaning up of the buildings and the surroundings of the building, to make the children feel like they were safe, they were worthy of having a decent place to have an education. And I applaud them. I applaud this team, many of them in which I have worked with in the past. Somewhere along the line, just like a family, you might have 8 children, and you might have one of them that falls down. But we don't hold them down. We do whatever we can to pull them up. And I think that's what the great state of Indiana is going to do. For a long time, I watched Gary pay their own way, and they did that. We had a crisis where our steel mill wasn't even paying the taxes, and the Gary Community School was trying to carry the weight of everybody. When you become the second largest employer of a city, that's a lot of weight on your shoulders. And again, like I say, I thank Dr. Hinckley for walking into a situation in which me, myself, I think I would have did the moonwalk like Michael Jackson out of there. But they have not did that. They have stood their ground. They have said, we're going to get this together. And again, I say, I trust the state board to know that they are your children too. Do whatever you can to help them. And someday, one of those children are going to look back and help you as well. God bless you.
Peggy,
Do you have any questions?
Peggy, my final comment for you is that although we don't have statutorily any commitment, responsibility by law, we do have a commitment, responsibility to help and assist. And sometimes the work gets lonely, I believe, and there's a number of us who will support you in that. So
well, I must admit, Mrs. Lauderdale mentioned the moonwalk. You know, we are the hometown of Michael Jackson, and I've been watching his videos lately because in case I need a fast escape. But I would say this, that I think the reaction has been, there are people that believe that we are being used as a tool of the state to close the system. That has never been a charge I've ever been given by anyone from the Distress Unit Appeals Board. When we arrived in Gary, we found conditions in schools to be what I would consider substandard. So we focused our efforts on fixing the plumbing, making sure there were adequate supplies and bathrooms that had not been there for 5 years, according to what teachers told us and principals told us. I think parents have seen the cleanliness of the buildings, operational plumbing. They've seen that the grass was mowed because that wasn't happening. Those things signify, we all know curb appeal makes a difference. And that standard shouldn't be any different in Gary, Indiana than it would be in any other school in Indiana. I know you would all agree with that. So I think for some people, they've seen action that has helped them think, well, we don't know who this lady is, but maybe things are a little better. I think ultimately, we have two significant challenges. Number one, we must get dramatic improvement in student achievement. And secondly, we are exceeding our revenue monthly by $1.8 million, and then we have an accrued debt of $108 million. The financial situation is daunting. So we must make progress in both of those things if we are to be successful. And so I think ultimately that's how our parents will judge us.
Dr. Hinckley,
Yes,
it's
sir.
been quite some time since I've sat in your office in Warren.
Yes, sir.
I'm not
Thank
sure if
you.
you remember that.
Thank
but
you
it's
for
been a
even
while.
remembering that.
You bet.
I'm kind of an oldie but goodie, you know.
I just want to say how pleased I am that you're in this role, taking on this epic responsibility, and your team. You know, I think it's an example of what good leadership can bring to a challenging situation. And I think it's also a lesson for those of us here that while everything may not be in your control, there's a whole heck of a lot that is within your control. And you can implement significant change for the better, you know, with limited resources and many, many challenges on the ground. So I just want to say, you know, we have struggled on this board for years with the situation up there in Gary. We closed a school. You know, we have, I think, done our best to try to help. But I can tell you that my confidence level in what's going to happen on the ground going forward is significantly higher. Wish you well. Anything, obviously, that we can do, you know, we're here to help. And, you know, again, just back to what's important. This is about kids and their opportunity for a future in the state of Indiana. And, you know, we have not been giving them the opportunity they deserve, access to a good education. So, you know, good luck in your mission. And, you know, again, anything that this board can do to help, let us know. We'll do whatever we need.
Thank you, Mr. Henry. Just so you know, I was born in Gary. It's my hometown. Did my elementary schooling there, and then my parents moved to Maryville, where I finished my high school career. So this is my hometown, and sometimes we're called to serve when it's our hometown.
I was going to bite my tongue on this one, Peggy, but since you brought it up, with $100 million in debt, negative cash flow, the state currently picking up payroll, what really is the path forward here? That's not a fair question, I know.
No, it's a fair question. You're a public official. You know, it's a fair question.
I just can't see it.
Well, I would say some days I have trouble seeing. I would be less than honest if I didn't say it is daunting. It is clear that the expectation from the Distress Unit Appeals Board is that we get control of the monthly excess bleeding, if you will, that we're exceeding our revenue. What has made that additionally challenging is we lost 500 kids this year, which has been a pattern for Gary Community School Corporation. But in all honesty, when the takeover occurred, while we had a lot of effort to make sure people knew we were open for business, the results were not as much as we would have liked. So I think their expectation is that we try to get that monthly amount in some kind. So we're looking at where our excess costs are, where we are. For example, we have been under supervision of the special education division for 10 years. And we now have not only a new director of special ed, but we have the Department of Ed gave us a person in the interim when I had no one. And we're literally recreating our entire special education group to see whether, because we appear to be spending money that beyond what we would be expected in terms of maintenance of local effort. I don't know if that's true until we reconstruct all of the services that are required, but that's a piece. I would tell you in the comment about what do people think, commonly what I hear from people, and I'm sure you do too, sir, and Gary, is this is the state's fault because of the tax caps. Gary collects about 72% in property taxes, but because of the caps, they only receive about 42%. So that means in Gary that we pay more out of general fund for transportation. We can have a capital projects budget, but we have no money to fund it. So those are real problems, but I think we all know that our answer is not to blame anyone. It's to get busy. But I think it is daunting to know how we would ever cut enough to make up. If I was able to pay $1 million a month back to the debt, that's 108 months. I hope I'm still living when that comes, but that's overwhelming. And so I do think that I think the Distress Unit Appeals Board understands this is very daunting. And when you have to keep borrowing money every month to make payroll, while we're trying to reduce that expenditure and that need, we're just going further in the hole. So it is a very difficult situation, and I wouldn't try to make it look anything different.
Thank you for that answer.
What is the structure of your debt? I mean, where is the debt from previous projects? Is it?
The accumulated debt has to do with just unpaid things we haven't paid to vendors. We have 20 court judgments against us for non-payment. We owe the insurance company $4 million, Cigna Health Insurance, which prevents us from bidding or becoming self-insured or doing other things that would be more cost-effective. We owed the transportation company, but I think we've caught up with them. And then we have, I'm sorry. Yes. And then, we have some internal revenue obligations. And then we have, if I remember this correctly, $40 million, I think, in loans from the state, and another $40 million, someone told me, are from private, like the banks. So, we've been borrowing our way to a very difficult position. And all those things are, obviously, people are waiting to get paid.
You said you collect 72% of your AV, or of your
property tax.
Taxes based on your assessment.
But because of the tax caps, we only realize 42%, is what I've been told, both by a school board member and then Courtney Shofstra from DUAB has confirmed that. That's accurate.
I just have to, Dr. Hinckley, I mean, the limited conversations we had, but I know you've been working with our team. I am proud of your team. We're hopeful. To your administrators, we appreciate you coming today. I know you're up against a huge challenge. And you're right, Tony, you cannot describe the situation to anyone unless you go visit, unless you go live it. And so it is a very, very difficult situation, not just fiscally, but academically. And so you're really loading things on. But I also want to give a shout out to Marsha Bugala, because Marsha has been in the weeds with Courtney and is at you anytime your team calls. Marsha's willing to help them out, and I see her in her office and she's like, I'm going to go help those babies in Gary. She shuts that door and she does her thing. So to Leanne, who has also been helpful, I know she's gotten a shout out today too, and Nathan, but beyond that, Marsha has been a key player with DUAB and with your team, and I just appreciate that so much, Marsha, because you have been really committed to helping the situation out. So thank you, Peggy, for everything you're doing and to your team.
Are we finished?
Any other comments?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Assessment update, Dr. Flores. Oh, I'm sorry. No? I'm so sorry. I skipped right over that. Sorry, Mr. Best, Dr. Best, sorry about that. Graduation pathway update.
Morning, everybody, or afternoon about there. Todd Best with IASP, and first of all, too, a little shout out to all of our principals. October is National Principals Month, recognized by the two national associations of NAESP and NASSP. We'll be doing things this month, and appreciate, too, we have a proclamation from Governor Holcomb during a week later this month as well. On the graduation pathway topic, I've attended or we've been represented at each of those meetings for the last 2 months. That includes the double session yesterday, thank you, Dr. Ernest, that have been added and invited back industry reps, schools with partnerships, and then higher education as well. What seemed to emerge yesterday is some themes, or even maybe a model of what those pathways might look like. I know that October 10th is that meeting to draft those recommendations. I wanted to maybe give those panel members who are here, and you as also a state board, just some comments about what might be references as you approach that discussion. Seemed like in the morning session there was strong sentiment for work-based learning continuum, or simply that all kids should have access to CTE courses. Kids do have access for those courses. Our son Garrett, who is headed to college, hopefully, junior year, certainly is in another CTE course again this year. For those that pass the end-of-course assessment, that just further opens the door to take those CTE courses that match their career interests. I think also a lot of comments yesterday mentioned a lot of communication, and that can help further that along. For those that don't happen to pass an end-of-course assessment, and now that we would not have to continue to retest them, then that also opens access to those courses, assuming that their schedule permits, given that credit sometimes is an issue for them. In the afternoon, higher ed also, when questioned about the end-of-course assessment, so they do see that passing that ECA as a part of a student earning a diploma has value. A framework that was also suggested today revolved around 6 career majors. I'm reminded of a couple of things. One that charged the panel was to develop pathways to graduation, and particularly those career majors seem to be more about diploma expectations. And I think we kind of heard that a little bit in the IPS presentation around how they were structuring their high schools. That's the job of the high school principal and the board of that to help move those kids through. We also had those discussions 2 years ago when we discussed changing the diplomas. And comments then focused on how would that work, especially for kids that change plans or happen to miss out on a course due to mobility and couldn't complete their major. How a student moves through high school as a part of that graduation planning via school counseling. We're blessed to have the Lilly Endowment here in our state, and they've recently endowed several corporations with money to help further that along. And I saw they also announced an additional revenue to make that happen for further schools. In the morning and afternoon sessions, we heard about core skills or competencies. As I noted what those were, it seems like many of those, or really all of those, are contained within our academic standards. In fact, this board asked that of Dr. Farabee about how that would apply across their schools now that they're being reformulated a little bit. And he said, yes, those are integrated or infused within each of those particular programs. Students earning their diploma credits and passing the ECA are evidencing those core skills. If we want to consider how to approach those that are not passing that end-of-course assessment and what that evidence is that they have those skills, I think that then is part of the pathway discussion. The concept of an e-portfolio is interesting to document or evidence, again, what those skills might be, the students who have soft skills or employability skills. I know that's maybe a much better term sometimes, that are desired in both our higher ed and in our workforce. There was good caution yesterday from a collaborator that said we have gone down some of that portfolio path at times, and the difficulty in maintaining those, or in a sense, who's inputting the evidence into those portfolios is extremely challenging, especially even if we go to an electronic format. If we can tap into an existing system that's there, then perhaps that's done by the student, then maybe that's a possibility. But I just, again, concerned about the manageability sometimes of how we can do those and how those are then applied. Thank you. We do have successful students graduating from high schools every year, and those students are completing a pathway of earning a diploma after they have passed the end-of-course assessment. Directing them into areas of need for our state and for long-term success, to me that also speaks to a communication issue, not necessarily the pathway that they must complete, and we can all agree to work on communication with our kids. In the end, the best pathway is the relationship as teachers and our principals build with those students. As we viewed this pathway opportunity initially, we appreciated the simple approach. Pass the ECA and pursue your diploma path, the schools push the rigor. For those that don't pass, the pathway can better define how you're diploma eligible versus a lot of other retesting. Let's remember the high school kids have lots of priorities. Let's stay focused on that simple pathway and solution for our kids. Thank you very much for the time and the extra few seconds.
Thank you, Dr. Best.
Thank you.
Byron?
Well, you've heard a pretty detailed from yesterday's meetings, which we either call it having sixth meeting yesterday or one, because we had two yesterday, but I believe progressing nicely. We do have themes that have begun to emerge. You will get a copy of those themes. It was failed to get into the packet, but we have a set of those themes that we printed out, gave to the panel yesterday. You're going to get a set of those. But over those first 6 meetings or 7, depending on what you want to call them, we've had dialogues with teachers, counselors, CTE directors, principals, administrators, superintendents, advocates, national specialists, nonprofits, businesses, institutions of higher education, and students. And I'm proud of that. And we've had them, not what I've called meetings, but convenings. They've been conversations. Nobody has jumped to, I said this yesterday, I have been agnostic through all of this to listen, and we have listened. And again, some themes have begun to come out. And now it's time to begin to put those themes into place. And a few things that I just want to mention about that are one, yesterday we joked, Dr. Best didn't bring this up in his detailed report from yesterday, but we joked about having a lot of F words in this. And it's been talked about flexible, fundable, and then a framework that we've begun to be able to see. And again, that flexibility, and we heard that from Dr. Farabee this morning, that flexibility of schools being able to not having this necessarily change what schools are doing or having schools need to change, but having it be flexible enough that what they're doing now fits the framework. Us having a framework that then sets the standard for what that looks like. And so that's going to be one of the challenges as we move forward in writing this. And again, that helps with the transportable of this, or portability of those, and also regionalization has been one of the things that we've talked a lot about with that. A couple of other things that I think have been interesting themes that have come out is one, exploration of careers starting at kindergarten. And that came out yesterday. We had some folks that were very adamant about, hey, you guys need to look at this pathways really even dipping down to kindergarten and starting looking at those. And Dr. Farabee again explained that this morning, talking about, hey, there comes a point, we want this to be very porous as we've been talking about, or being able for students to move around, but at some point, you're going to have to make a decision and be there with that. And so therefore, it was talked about really starting that at an earlier level so that kids could begin to have that, which then goes to some of the work-based piece. We talked about this yesterday too, where a student with some work-based experience realizes, I'm not even interested in that. Or the example that one of them gave yesterday was they want to go into healthcare and then realize that they faint every time they see blood. Probably not going to be the career, right? And so those are some of the things that have become important. And then also working with parents, again, has come out with a theme. How do we, with these pathways, really help parents understand how to help their students and guide them along? So that's been an interesting piece, and those are some of the pieces. Also, a part of the framework is that a school would need to be involved with industry. have some involvement with industry and business in this process. And so, again, I think creating an educated and talented workforce is the goal here with that, but you can tell some of the themes. Super excited that yesterday we took that deeper dive, circled completely back to higher ed and business where we started this process because we felt like we needed to be back to that. And so it was really good. I think to use Dr. Freitas's analogy, you know, we've begun to have the frame around the puzzle. Now, you also said yesterday that we dumped a few more pieces into the box for the puzzle, but I think it is coming together. To give you just real quick last bullet points here of moving forward, next Tuesday, October 10th, is our next meeting. That's where we will begin to draft a version of recommended pathways. Then on the 17th, we have invited all of the collaborators that we've had back in to this to look at some initial drafts and what that looks like. So maybe a little more, we're trying to figure out what informal, I'm saying informal, what informal looks like with a panel like this and how you work, but really to get some feedback from everybody that's been involved so far. And I'm really excited about doing that. And then again, we continue to take public comment. We also take it with our email portal, gradpathways_comment@sboe.in.gov. And also on that site are the graphic recordings of all of our meetings as well for folks to look at. November 7th then, just to last 2 points, November 7th will be our last panel meeting. Unless they decide to add another one. Don't plan to, though. Sorry, Alicia. November 7th will be our last one where the panel votes on the recommendation, and then in December, the board will see that. And I would be very remiss if I did not close with, I really appreciate the support. I want board members to understand the support that our board staff has given to this process, and I would be very remiss if I did not kudo out or shout out to Alicia on that and the work that she has done with that. She's made me look good, and I appreciate that. And Brian too has been a big part of that. So yeah, there's the report.
Could I ask a question? What's the format on the 17th?
We're still working on that, Steve.
Okay.
Because I say informal and everybody cringes, so we're trying to figure out. We want to have the people who have been in to be collaborators to have the chance to react and spend a little time with that.
Thanks. Thank you.
Just a comment, and just to, again, I think this is an important strategy for our state. I would concur. I do believe, and I think research would support this, we have to get to our students early. And on a number of levels, not just around career awareness and so forth, but also around foundational skills. And there are too many careers that are shut off to students. You know, for instance, if you get through high school and you don't think you're good at math, you're not going to go into any kind of career or major that requires math. You're going to avoid it. And those two subjects in particular, math and science, that is, we have a lot of careers that are cut off to our students as a result of that. The other is, Byron, you mentioned access to workplace experiences and so forth. I concur with that. One of the things that would be interesting to see how we approach this challenge is geography then matters to some extent. And if you look at a high industry based community where there's intentional outreach for internships and workplace experiences for students, there are a lot of places where that's not readily available. And it's just logistically challenging. We need to figure out how we can use technology and other resources to ensure those students still have access or some visibility into a wide range of careers. I think that's going to be a real important piece for us. And there are resources out there. We just need to think about how we make those part of the system where students aren't limited because they happen to live in a place where there's very little industry.
And you know, if I could reply to that, conversely to that, what's interesting, and you're absolutely right, was Nate Davis yesterday from Decatur brought this up, that sometimes we look at those areas that don't have a lot of businesses as being limited, but they said, you know, in an area where you have a lot, like in the Indianapolis area, then you're all competing for the same ones. And that becomes a challenge as well, which was interesting to me. He brought some great insight into that. And I looked at my own past where I were in Lebanon with an ag program. We did a lot of work with Ag Reliant, still there. And I said, you know, in an area like that that's maybe limited, it was great for me because I was the only gig in town for them. So sometimes it works to your advantage too. So we have to figure that out as to what that looks like and how we can make that all work. So you're absolutely right, and I think it works. But we have to remember there's disadvantages on both sides of that if we're all going for the same people.
There are. You just don't want students to grow up thinking that's the only industry available to them because of where they live.
Ag is the only industry, isn't it?
I understand that. That's what I understand.
You know, something I just want to make sure I am once again expressing my concern about, which I have several times. I know some of you are sick of me and sick of hearing this. But as far as the grad pathway panel, I know Indiana's really good about saying we're going to put a committee together or a panel together, and you can only talk about X. That's it. When you go to implement X, if you don't talk about other things around it, it becomes very difficult. So I would, again, just caution the panel to pay attention to our CTE plan statewide is coming out, our STEM plan is being worked on, we have a graduation rate issue that we cannot ignore, and all of those things play in so that we are smart with our resources and we don't set schools up for implementation that becomes very difficult when resources are flowing one way and we're required to do something else. We've done that before. So I really hope we learn from our mistakes. I hope we pay attention to the landscape and really pay attention to what's coming out of the governor's office here soon with CTE plan, and then get with our STEM council to say, what is that conversation and how is that happening? And then what are the updates of the graduation rate? So I think all that plays in. I know we're not supposed to talk about any of that at the graduation pathway panel meetings. However, I think it's very smart of us to pay attention to all of that. Tony.
I'm really looking forward to seeing the recommendations of the panel. However, I'm hoping that in those recommendations that the emphasis is really going to be on the development of core skill sets that sort of are included in all the different pathways. Because like I think Vince and David have both mentioned, Vince was saying earlier, the pathways, even for high school students, will shift and change numerous times over their careers and their lives. If we start projecting back to pre-K or kindergarten, we can't even conceive of how many times the career options and pathways may shift. But the one thing that will be consistent, I know we talk about stacking credentials, we need to be thinking about kids stacking skill sets. You know, reading comprehension, computation, analysis, writing skills. I mean, if you have those 4 or 5 basic skill sets, you can move between pathways. And I think that's what needs to be emphasized, I hope, in this plan, that while we have some more targeted pathways to specific career outcomes, where we're really emphasizing is making sure kids can read, write, think, analyze, compute.
And you know, again, I would react to that too, and Dr. Freitas, you may want to jump in on this as well. I found it interesting yesterday with business and industry. We let them come up with what would be somewhat of a framework, and those core competencies were on there. And we had David's. Gosh, and I always have trouble with it. And give me your skills. Essential personal skills, soft skills. And we had then the other ones like the problem solving, critical thinking, and that. And it was interesting that then higher education brought those same ones up in the afternoon, and they said we need to, you know, it it didn't blow us away, but yet it was, wow, they're saying the same thing. And we've been talking about really this does look the same because it's all post-secondary, right? It's right for all kids. So to your point, that has been talked about a lot in that. Sorry.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you. Assessment update, Dr. Flores.
Good afternoon. I just have a few updates to share with everything that's been taking place over the last month in terms of reporting and a few other things. So first, just to note, we did complete our ISTAR reporting over the last few weeks. We did experience some delays from Questar associated with that work and wanted to note that for you. But at this time, schools and corporations have received all of their final reports. At the last meeting, we had some conversation and discussion around some additional instructional supports that could be provided as resources, knowing that we weren't going to release items from the 2017 administration. I wanted to provide an update to you about some conversations that we've had both internally with PK16 and additionally with Pearson in terms of some resources that we can build upon that are already being provided, and additionally build out some additional pieces that will provide some additional clarity around expectations with the assessment. So for those specific areas that we've defined as a weakness or a challenge, we are going to provide some additional detail around the grade 10 blueprints. So up to this point, as many of you are aware, we provide blueprints that have very high level percentage ranges that don't provide a lot of clarity about which specific standards we're assessing and to what degree. We are going to build upon what we've been doing with science blueprints to provide this level of clarity for the grade 10 assessment. So for those that are offering remediation, they can better understand how our assessment is characterized. We're planning to deliver those starting on Friday. Additionally, we're going to also release our passage specifications. So again, up to this point in time, we haven't characterized the expectations around some of the quantitative and qualitative measures associated with the passages that are presented in the assessment. So that will also be provided on Friday. We're also very excited about a new format that we're able to provide educators as they prepare for the transition to an online assessment. We're actually building out blank platforms that educators can use as practice and to integrate in terms of their instruction for the writing prompt and some of the math items. Essentially, what this will allow an educator to do is either part of morning work or some of their instructional activities, they can present some items to students, and through this blank form, they would interact, the students would interact and respond similarly to how they would be expected to do on the assessment. So if an educator is trying to mirror what the assessment provides in terms of functionality, this blank form will allow them to do that. So we're planning to release that on October 13th. Additionally, we have some additional pieces that we're adding throughout October, November, and December. One of the critical things that I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of is both PK16 and the assessment staff are available as a resource. So if there's professional development opportunities, if there's conferences, if there's ways that we can be available and interact, essentially we just need people to contact us so that we can determine the best ways to support everyone in the field. I know there's a lot of questions that we are receiving right now, especially around the online transition, so we want to make ourselves available and accessible. Are there any questions related to these? Okay. The next point that I wanted to raise today is we typically receive a report from Pearson annually about response analysis. In the last few years, the department has not taken any specific action around this data file. However, in terms of our monitoring, our due diligence, we need to elicit some additional information from schools and corporations around what potentially may be happening with some groups of students. So the response analysis is really designed for us to better understand groups of students that have a significant number of changes from wrong to right. And because we haven't really investigated this fully over the last few years, this year we want to really be cautious and thoughtful about the types of information that we gather. But again, to do our due diligence, we need to seek some additional information from some schools and corporations. So related to that, we're identifying 2 tiers where we would like to gather some additional information. And those 2 tiers are based around the standard deviations in relationship to the mean. So tier 1 has a variance of 4 to 6 standard deviations from the mean in terms of the number of changes from wrong responses to right responses. And just to give you a frame of reference, in general, across the state, we generally have about 1 change in a test administration from wrong to right. In these cases where they're being flagged, we see ranges of between 7 to 10 or more. So it's a very significant number in relationship to the state average. So in tier 1, what we're asking for...
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yes.
I'm sorry. So are we talking about cheating on the tests? Is that what we're talking about?
At this point, we don't know exactly what's happening.
I realize we
in
don't
these
have all the
cases.
information you're investigating. There's multiple standard deviations, but what we're talking about here is test cheating, correct?
Well, I don't know, right now, I don't know that it is in fact cheating. There can be cases of student populations where because of other factors, they may have a significant number of changes as they work through a test administration.
That's the PhD answer. For the non-PhDs here, well, I understand statistics enough to know that if you're 2 or more standard deviations out, then that is material. That's a fair statement. So I just want everyone in the room to understand what we're talking about. So please continue.
And I guess what I would say is
the department is not accusing anyone of cheating at this point. You have to investigate. So I think this board needs to be cautious that we are investigating.
Correct.
Yeah.
And just thinking purely statistically, if you look at standard deviations, someone is going to fall in there somewhere. I mean, that's how data would be distributed in terms of a curve. So someone is going to fall outside of a set.
And I understand that there are outliers, and sometimes there's a standard deviation of 2 or 3, but the statistics will bear out whether there's some significant correlation, multiple cases, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just want to be clear. There has been nothing done with this data that has been delivered from Pearson in the last few years.
That's correct.
Okay.
So what we're proposing for this year is to gather some additional information from those that are falling in these 2 tiers. And based on the information that we collect, determine if further information may be needed or other courses of action may need to be pursued. At this point in time, we are really trying to better understand what's happening in some of these cases. So just in terms of counts, we have 30 test sessions that are falling into the tier 1 incidence, which is the 4 to 6 standard deviations. We have 11 test sessions that are falling into the tier 2, which would be over 6 standard deviations.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So tier 1 or tier 2, I mean, that is pretty highly suspect, correct? If you're seeing assessments in those 2 categories.
So for me, that's where, when we looked at the standard deviations and where we needed to solicit more information, this is where I feel like we really need to better understand what's happening either with these specific populations of students or these specific locations. Because as we consider monitoring going forward, knowing that we have to do that annually and should be doing that annually, I need to make sure that our test security practices support us gathering the right information so we don't get to this point in time.
Can you give us a sense of how many tests we're talking about or how many schools we're talking about?
Yes. So for this distribution, we have 22 sites that are impacted. And in terms of student count, we're looking at about 767 students. So it's a small, I mean, generally speaking, in terms of the large population, it is a small number, but we do need to do a thoughtful process to better understand what's happening.
So when you do this investigation, which I certainly support to get the data before we reach any kind of conclusions, what are you going to ask them?
Right. So we are going to develop a template very similar to a process that we go through with our test security and irregularity matters. And really, a lot of times that's focused on interviewing certain individuals that are part of the test administration practice and also better understanding the type of training that's provided to those individuals. And then we also request information about their test scheduling, how the administrations were actually conducted, other people that may have been in the room at the time, so that we have a better picture of really how that was in fact standardized for those students.
So is there any rational explanation that you will accept given that process?
Well, again, I think this year we're trying to be thoughtful, especially considering that this wasn't something that we defined clearly in advance of the administration. So I think we're trying not to be overbearing, knowing that the guidelines or the criteria weren't well established in advance. But knowing that we have this data, I don't think we can take no action to better understand what's potentially happening.
I'm not recommending we take no action, but I'm just trying to think of someone responding to this in a rational way that would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you foresee? Obviously, you foresee some kind of an explanation that would be acceptable, right? Or else you wouldn't do these interviews.
Right.
Right. So what would be an acceptable excuse, hypothetically, that would say that scores were changed or responses were changed from wrong to right beyond the distribution level?
Sure. So just as an example, there
Sure.
are lots of test-taking strategies that exist. And so some of those may have students mark answers and move on. Some of them may have them flag answers and move on. And in those cases, if the student went back and changed their answer, that could potentially impact this type of data. So that would be one example. But again, for it to be applied to large groups of students, that would need to be a strategy that somehow reinforced either through instruction or some other means, because these aren't incidences of a single student, these are groups of students.
Right. I'm just trying to understand an instructional approach that's widely accepted that would have a high percentage of kids change their answer from wrong to right. If it was going in both directions, I could understand that that may happen. My other question while I have the floor is, what's the timeline for you completing the investigation and getting back to us?
Sure. So in terms of our next steps, we are going to reach out to superintendents and corporation test coordinators in October. Depending on the level of severity here, we have slightly different time frames, varying from about 2 weeks to giving them a month to investigate. But I would suspect in general I could provide an update probably by the December meeting.
Great, thank you.
Sorry if you've already told us this, but how's Pearson able to identify or flag these?
So there's two different methods that are used generally depending on the mode. So with online, there's much more data that we can collect about student interaction, just given the data points that are available within an online platform. With paper, it is based more on gradients of how the responses are captured in the test booklets. So depending on if a student has darkened, that can be picked up by the scanner when the student documents are processed, and so there's ways to capture that as well.
So it's picking up erasures?
Yes.
These are great questions, and I appreciate questions from the board. I've been concerned about schools who make dramatic turnarounds from Fs to As and Bs for some time. And I'm going to be very interested to, I don't know if board members can receive who the schools are, and if the schools that are identified had significant changes in school or district letter grades.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of our outreach to the corporations and schools, I believe that we would be able to hand over those locations to the board so that you would know them at the time that we're reaching out to them as well. And then I think in terms of the correlation between this analysis and some of the other things that are taking place with accountability, that's something that we would have to delve into more.
So what did you just say?
We will talk to our legal
I got the
team.
first part.
Dr. Yeager, we'll talk to our legal team about what we can and cannot provide the board, and we will get back with you. I don't want to put the department or districts, because we are not saying anyone cheated at this point.
I know.
We don't want to put anybody in jeopardy, so we will get some good legal opinion, and we will get back to the board.
Is it possible, maybe not to you, but to the legal team, is it possible to embargo this information to board members so it's kept confidential? That's just an open question. You'll find out and let us know.
One other question, we just released grades. And the grades that we just released are some of these schools that you're talking about now in the released grades we've just done.
Well, the schools are the schools, so the potential exists for that to be true.
I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but is there an opportunity to resend and go back those particular grades? I'm looking at legal counsel, that if there was an indication, potentially, allegedly, of some missteps, is there an opportunity to go back and redo the grades for those particular schools, since we just issued grades? And I'm looking to legal counsel for an answer.
So just going back with some history, at one time, under West Bruce, this was always, if they would identify where there would be high erasures, they would notify districts, they would tighten security issues, they would make sure best practices were in place. So then that, for the last few years, that procedure hasn't occurred. And so under Dr. McCormick's administration, we're once again going to tighten it up. So we're not trying to accuse anyone of anything. We just know that right now there may be some instances of more erasures. We'll bring that back to districts, help them tighten up their procedures so that we can have confidence that the grades schools receive are accurate. So I think that's where we are today.
So my question for legal counsel, in that we've just sent out the grades, released grades, if there's something more than just an honest mistake or a misunderstanding, then do we have the opportunity legally to go back and change a grade?
It's an excellent question, and I don't think it's something that we've necessarily studied before. So with your permission, I don't want to try to shoot from the hip on that one. It's kind of a pretty serious question. So I'd like the opportunity to research it and get back to you. And especially as we learn more information, because this all sounds very preliminary. I will research.
Thank you.
Dr. Bertram?
I want to be clear, this is an active, current investigation. correct?
Well, the investigation hasn't fully started with schools and corporations yet.
Right, but I'm saying it is current. This is moving forward. You don't need any kind of action by this board to start or complete this investigation, correct?
Right. I just wanted to provide an update so you knew that we were taking some action
So
on
any
this.
questions or responses to certain questions may compromise the investigation.
Right. We're trying to be very thoughtful right now.
Yes, and I think that's a real important issue, right? That go investigate and then come back and share the information rather than us hold a public hearing on something before the investigation begins.
Right. And I think what I would say is, in anticipation of next spring's administration, I want to make sure that we're very clearly defining criteria and expectations so that as we receive this data in the future, everyone knows what those expectations are.
If I may, I would like to add something. Is prior to your employment, I think, Dr. Flores, with the DOE, I was associated with the school district who had an exorbitant number of erasers in one fifth grade classroom. And the department did come in and investigate and talk, and they did a thorough job, and they found what they found. And so it has happened before. So we do have a history, it's going to be 6 or 7 years ago now, of this occurring. So I'm not too worried about it. I know that they'll do their due diligence and find what they find and report what they need to report. But thank you for bringing this forward.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, and then the last point I have is just an update on the alternate assessment RFP. We are in the final stages of drafting that document in terms of its scope of work. All of the materials have been sent to the state board, to our technical advisory committee, and also our assessment implementation advisory group. We are planning to bring this forward for you to approve the release at the November 1st meeting. And I just included the overview of all of the process steps that we've worked through up to this point. So again, that will come to you later this month so that we can finalize that for your approval on the 1st. And that's all I have. Thank you.
I'm afraid to ask. Any other questions or comments for Dr. Flores? Thank you very much. Sure. That concludes our business. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Any discussion? We're adjourned. Oh, all those in favor?